Good evening. Let's call to order the Champaign County Board Committee of the whole meeting for Finance, Policy, Personnel, and Appointments, Justice, and Social Services. Tuesday, May 9th, 2017. Time is 6:31. Could we have a roll call, please?
Cowart. Cruz. Esri.
Present.
Goss.
Present.
Harper.
Here.
Hartke.
Here.
Heiser.
Here.
King. Marsh.
Present.
McGuire. Michaels. Mitchell. Patterson. Petrie.
Present.
Rector. Rosales.
Here.
Summers. Tinsley. Alex. Anderson. Clemens. Weibel.
President, we have a quorum. Before we go to the agenda, we're pulling off items 8D4 and 9D5. 8D4 and item 9D5. And I'd ask for a motion to approve the agenda and the addendum as amended. Moved by Mr. Hartke, second by Mr. Anderson. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Seek approval of the minutes of April 11th, 2017. They should have been distributed in the yellow packet. Yes, and electronically at a previous time. Moved by Mr. Goss, second by Mr. Rector. Discussion on the minutes. Ms. Petrie?
I just want to note for the public that this set of minutes on the last committee of the whole meeting are extremely important because they contain a report of the factual data that both the county treasurer and county auditor presented to us a month ago related to the county finances, and express appreciation to Ms. Rhodes for getting it all down for us to reread. Thank you.
Further discussion? See none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Next up is public participation. I have nobody's forum, so is there any public participation today? All right. Seeing none, let's go on to communications from the board. Any communications from the board? I have one. This envelope is the County Board Flower Fund contributions, and it's used to send flowers to events that require flowers, like most recently with Mr. Carter's funeral. We're now in the negative, so we need contributions. So I'll send it down this way. It'll come back that way. I'll also send it out on the regular county board meeting in case you didn't bring your $100 bills with you, and also for the people who are not here. Go ahead, Mr. Hart.
Yes, Mr. Tinsley just asked me to express his sorry that he couldn't be here tonight. He had a Spanish final tonight that could not be rescheduled.
I'll accept pesos too. Large amounts though. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
We're actually in the hole as far as the fund's concerned, so we're really kind of got to work our way out.
Well, working our way out, hopefully we'll get above that too.
Yes, that's kind of, yeah, thank you.
That's the aim, or the goal. Again, I'll send this around at the county board meeting too. Okay, let's move to Justice and Social Services. Mr. Heiser.
Yeah, not much this month. We have monthly reports that can go on file. Moving on to, or without objection, we'll put those on file. For other business, I don't have any right now, but I guess for chair's report, I am talking with Racial Justice Task Force on bringing an extension forward next month to give them those couple extra months that they wanted and that they feel they need to get their work done. So expect that in June. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Heiser. Next up is policy person on appointments, Mr. Rosales.
Okay, I will have to pass the gavel now to our Chair, Pius Weibel, to make the following appointments, appointments and reappointments for the Board of Review.
Yes, I nominate Paul Saylor for the term of June 1st, 2017 to May 31st, 2019.
Okay, we have a first and we have a second. All those in favor?
Discussion.
Any discussion? Put the
Actually, I'll
the
just.
cart before
yeah,
the horse.
Mr. Saylor, I think, is well qualified for this position. He's passed all the necessary certification and tests for that. He's been in the appraisal business for quite some time. At one time, he was in the real estate business. He says that he doesn't do much of that now. He's mostly just an appraiser, so I think he's well qualified for the job, and I think he'll do a good job, too. And he's also a pretty nice guy.
Okay, two, Sangamon Valley What was that? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes. Okay, number two, Sangamon Valley Public Water District, one position, term from 6/1/2017 to 5/31/2022.
I nominate Mr. Mike Larson for that position.
Okay, moved by Lorraine, second by,
No, actually, I move it.
oh, moved it, second by Lorraine.
Yeah.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Number three, Penfield Water District, one position, term from 6/1/2017 to 5/31/2022. Pius?
I nominate Mr. Mark Richardson for this position.
Okay, moved by Pius, second by Diane. All those in favor? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Dewey Community Public Water Works, number four, one position, term 6/1/2017 to 5/31/2020. Pius?
Make that 2022. The person I want to, I move the nomination of Mr. Thomas Zindars.
Okay, moved by Pius. Could I get a second? Second by
Heiser.
Heiser. Any discussion?
Point of order. Did we not remove that? I had 8, number 4.
No,
That's right.
it was D4. D4 was the one that was supposed to be
D4,
removed.
my fault.
D4.
And D5 under finance.
Got it.
Okay, second by Heiser, and any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. And then the last one, Urbana Champaign Sanitary District, one position, from 6/1/2017 to 5/31/2020. We have two candidates.
I move the nomination of Liddell Myrick for this position.
Okay, moved by Pius, second by, I heard some, Harkey. Any discussion?
Yeah, I'll discuss it. Yes, I'd like to.
Okay.
Obviously, two people applied, they're both qualified. Mr. Myrick, or Reverend Myrick, I point out that he is a minister, really a part-time minister. His full-time job is selling insurance, although I think he preferred to do the latter than the former. But he's got a long career in selling insurance, and has been in this town for probably about 25 years. Michael Adu, also well-known, is a former member of the Champaign City Council. I think he was on it for 32 years, has vast experience with working with governments and things like that. It was not an easy choice. I picked Mr. Myrick because going back on the history of the sanitary district, it largely consisted of lawyers and recycled public officials. Now and then you get another person one of those other persons, Chris Alex here, actually, he was recycled too to a certain extent. And you can disagree or agree with me if you like, Mr. Alex. And for some reason, I don't know why we have two lawyers on the board, so we're down to one now, which I think is good. And it's time to try to get other people in there other than recycled government officials. So that's one of the reasons I picked Mr. Myrick. I mean, I know Jenny Putman's going to step down in 2 years, then maybe Mr. Ledoux can apply then, and it might be appropriate time for him to come on board.
Any further discussion, Patsy?
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity that since we have this appointment to encourage both the county board and this board to collaborate and look at the state statute on the configuration of the board for the sanitary district. This statute was written decades ago, and with about 4 words changing in that statute, the board membership could be expanded to 5 rather than just 3, and within that expansion of 2 more people, it would be very easy to define more in the level of expertise who should be appointed to that board. The board has not had any civil engineers or environmental engineers, water engineers, anything along those lines, and it would probably be very useful to have a 5-member board and 2 experts in the field of whatever the sanitary district does day by day and looks forward to be doing. Thank you.
And I believe by Alex?
I would note that the sanitary district, based on my experience, does have considerable talent on their staff in terms of engineering and stormwater, wastewater management. So my understanding of the intent of that board has always been that it is intended to be essentially a citizen oversight board more than an engineering oversight board. But I understand what you're saying, Patsy.
Thank you for that discussion. Anybody else? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Okay, for the highlight of the night. Is Julie here? Could I have Julie come up for discussion? Pardon? Well, it was the majority of our packet, and I'm pretty sure our board members have a lot of questions. County Board of Health requests a fee of approval of an ordinance amending fees under the health ordinance of Champaign County.
So move.
Okay, moved by Harkey. Could I get a second on that? Second. Second by Pius. Any discussion? Julie?
Okay, is that working? Okay, I put together a little PowerPoint to go along with. It's just brief, don't freak out, it's not very long at all, but this is just the crux of how this came about. The ordinance, well, I'll just go through it. So basically, why are fees, why do we have fees? There's volatility in state funding, of course. The local health protection grant, which is the core of the public health department, the county public health department, is $125,403 a year. It also has not been paid yet this year. Local health protection grant, all of that is needed for the communicable disease program. So we cannot charge fees for investigations or mitigation of communicable diseases. So if there's an outbreak, for example, we just have to go take care of it. We can't charge fees for that. And the fund balance is also needed to address emergencies or state funding loss. The maximum rate for the health fund levy is 0.10 out of 100 of assessed valuation, and the 2000 tax rate was 0.0304. Okay. So this is taken right out of the health ordinance. So this is how the proposed, this is why there are fees being proposed. So this is essentially the point of it. Right in the thing, it says recovery of costs. Now, this is in the county health departments, the county health board's ordinance. Except where specified by statute, the Board of Health shall set fee amounts that recover on average and in the aggregate as much as possible of the full cost, including fully apportioned indirect expenses incurred in providing specific services or of administering and enforcing specific provisions of this ordinance without the fees being in the judgment. Is that too loud?
No, it's static.
Oh.
You may not hear it, but we
Okay, sorry. Judgment of the Board of Health unduly burdensome or so high that they would discourage compliance or conflict with the purposes of the ordinance. The County Board of Health, which I'm here representing this evening, I guess, the County Board of Health has been working with public health staff for over 2 years to determine what an appropriate fee structure would be that would more adequately cover the cost. Many of the revisions to the proposed fee structure has been made during the past 2 years, and that's all the stuff you see in the packet. That's information from minutes, and I tried to include all that, and I put some tables together. I tried to answer the questions that were submitted to me in a way that hopefully makes sense. The County Board of Health adopted the ordinance at their November 10th meeting. And then this is also important because this also is out of the health ordinance. 12.1.3, review of fee schedules. The Board of Health shall annually, prior to preparation of its annual report, review the fee schedule to determine the sufficiency and its efficacy in promoting the purpose of this ordinance with respect to the criteria established in the subsection I just mentioned. It's been almost 20 years since the fees have been revised. They have never been revised for the potable water and the sewage program. It was actually Stan James who initiated this on the county board. He was the county board liaison, and he initiated this and said, you know, what are you doing? Why haven't you, to the other board members, why haven't you been looking at this? This is not right. This is supposed to be covered by fees. So that started the process. And again, Stan hasn't been there for a while, so it's been about 2 years. Okay, so currently, I just use this as an example, but the private sewage and disposal system, the current fees for construction activities were set in 1998 when the health department actually was funded and started, and they do not cover costs. Now, at the time, they made sense, obviously. County tax dollars are currently subsidizing private homeowners and private businesses for the construction of their private sewage disposal systems. So that's where this came from, and that's what led up to it. So, yeah, go ahead.
Just an information question. Can you help me understand this better, why that fee is transferring over to subsidize the private homeowner?
Absolutely. Because it is not, because that is, these private sewage and the disposal system it was set up when the health department was established to cover those costs, because you're in there and you're doing something for a private homeowner or a private business. And so if we're not covering cost, by definition, that's being subsidized.
Then maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I thought I heard you say that fees from something else were subsidizing the private homeowner.
Correct. No, I'm saying that the county tax dollars essentially, because there's only the county health department, because we're not talking about CUPHC, but the county health department has, and I just showed what the tax rate was, which of course you guys all know. So you have that, and you have fees, and you have the local health protection grant. And the local health protection grant, there are a lot of things in these programs that are covered by either the grant or the tax dollars, they're covered because they are of public health significance. So, for example, he's listed some of them in here. Let me look at here. You can see the things that there are no fees charged for. So, complaint investigations, no fees. Consultation, education, no fees. Complaint investigation, hauling, equipment inspection. Things that are like public, for the general public health, not for a private homeowner or a private business, for example. So you can see that there are, so if you look down here, you can see what things on each of the things are not charged. And again, also, we do not charge not-for-profits, for example, churches, things like that, aren't charged in general, even when normally a fee would be charged. Okay.
Thank you.
Jim?
Well, thank you for the things that you do. Appreciate that. And looking through the document, I'm not sure, and I've seen this, most of this before, because it looks more like a packet from the health department. But I guess there's two parts of that. What is the revenue from the tax levy paying for? I don't see that listed. And secondly, what in this document tells me how much it cost to do an inspection for the sewage, or, you know, that represents its actual cost when you're saying it's being subsidized by something else. When you are charging, what it doesn't really tell me in here why there's a fee increase and how much that fee increase should be, because other counties listed don't show that much of a charge. And I would wonder if Stan James would feel that the fee should be as high as this for you to say, to represent that he would do that
Well,
here tonight.
Interesting. I mean, I wish Stan were here, because he actually wanted a lot of other things that just eventually never got in. He wanted a lot of, specifically with restaurants and stuff, he was really irritated that we would have to, basically that they weren't charged for multiple things. So I couldn't tell you what he would think of these. But if you look, one of the things that I did on this little chart, because I know you wanted a matrix, so I kind of combined two things together. So you see.
Can we go back to that? Because I'd have a problem if you would represent some things that I would say as a county board member in front of the board if I wasn't here. So I won't speak for Stan James, but I would have a problem with that.
Okay, well, I won't, I mean, and you can go back in the minutes, certainly, they're online. You can see how it was initiated and why it was looked into originally. Again, it's been 19 years since these fees have been increased. So what I've done here is I think even without doing a whole lot of math, we can see that it would, in 19 years, the cost of things would go up in general. But what I've done here is the first column is the current fee from 1998, and then this is
Julie, what are you referring to?
Oh, I'm
specifically?
sorry. In your packet, it's under question, the first matrix. It says number 1 and 2, matrix showing former suggested fees.
Page 14.
And, yeah, thanks.
Yes.
So, did everybody find it? Okay, so I took the different fees, and I did the current fee, then the inflation, using the CPI, and I appended the CPI calculator that we used, and then, so that's the inflation rate, and then the proposed new fee on those. And then if you look, under potable water and all those, you can see the different ones. So we basically did that with all of those, and
We had one more additional question.
I guess what my question would be is, we're imposing these fees not to subsidize the taxes. So we're not subsidizing private homeowners' septic systems with tax dollars. What is my
Correct.
tax dollars being used for then?
well, interestingly, you should ask. Well, so basically, the county health department has, in order to be a county health department, you have to have core services. So that's your food protection, septic, water, and then communicable diseases, which is a big one. And I know at the last meeting, you said well, do we even have any communicable diseases in the county outside Champaign-Urbana? So actually in 2016, these are actual outbreak investigations that we had to do. Communicable disease is a super expensive program to operate. It requires nurses, it requires our epidemiologists, it requires environmental health staff to go out to mitigate. But in the county in 2016, and this probably will be interesting to you because you probably don't know this, but you've had the following diseases. These are class 1B. These are 24-hour return or 24-hour reporting times, meaning that they have to be reported to us within 24 hours of a lab certified case or suspecting a case of a doctor. So we had varicella, enteric E. coli, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, influenza, mumps, invasive meningitis, and group A streptococcus. The class 2 diseases, these are a 7-day reporting, so they have a little bit different of a time to do, but we had Campylobacter, cryptosporidiosis, hepatitis B and C, histoplasmosis, Legionella, Lyme disease, Salmonella, Shigella, of course the STDs, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, HIV, those things. And then we've also in the past, in 2015, had a pertussis outbreak and methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is MRSA. Now, those were just in the county outside of Champaign-Urbana, because we have other ones in there. But so that's part of it. The other thing is every time that there is something done at a restaurant or whatever, we have to go out and do investigations and all these things. No one is charged for that. That is just part of what the tax dollars pay for. Pays for the so basically it pays for the core services, all the core services. So everything that we do where fees cannot be charged, and some things we can't charge fees by statute, and some we can't charge fees because how do you do that if it's a massive outbreak? We're trying to put it out. So basically that's where the money goes for. It goes for staff, it goes for the infrastructure and the building and the staff. The vast majority goes for staff.
Thank you,
Obviously,
Julie.
as in any business.
Thank you, Julie. I have one additional question from Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, those are significant, but how much actual time were you in the county doing those things? And what was the cost of each time? Because I don't remember, I remember the big mumps outbreak at the university. I remember some of those things listed, but I don't remember them, I mean, as far as the amount of time and use of nurses in the county, in the rural areas of the county.
Okay.
Talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. Well, and you get so the county contracts with CUPHD for services, and every year you get like kind of the general budget that shows what it is that you're paying for, and again, it's mostly staff time, and the electronic health records or whatever, not the electronic health records for you guys, but the electronic digital health department for the inspectors and things like that. So it's basically, that's what you're paying for. And then what we've tried to do is to get and again, this was several years ago, but Deb Busey had suggested that we get a 25% fund balance because I was very nervous that we didn't have anything. One case of drug-resistant TB is going to wipe out all that. When we have a case of TB, for example, let me just tell you, because you probably wouldn't know this, but so let's say let's just pick Rantoul. So we have a case of regular old infectious pulmonary TB in Rantoul, which we don't, but I'm just saying, assume we do. When we have that, that person has to be put in isolation, and then every single day we have to send a nurse to that home to provide them with medication and to watch them take the medication. It's called directly observed therapy. And we have to do sputum tests and various things. We get zero money for TB, nothing. We used to have a TB levy. We do not have one anymore. We get nothing for that. So that's just one example of a case. But anyway, so you've got the fund balance, and then the extra money that's left over between what CUPHD charges for the core services, because that's all you purchase, are the core services, and then you've got your 25% fund balance, and then anything that's left over, then the County Board of Health is to purchase other public health services with that. So in the past, they've purchased, for example, child dental from Smile Healthy, and in varying degrees of money. So, and they have purchased other things in the past, but, you know, it was my recommendation that if they're going to purchase other public health services, that they stick to something that we have called the Community Health Improvement Project, so that it's in line with the goals of the whole community.
Goss?
So you've talked a lot about private sewage and potable water, but what about health or food fees? You didn't talk at all about that.
They're in there as well.
Right, there's significant raises in some of those as well. My question on that is, biggest problem I see in my district specifically that's cost businesses in my district hundreds of thousands of dollars is plan review. Is there any of this money going to go towards making plan review somewhat reasonable? Because 45 days, I'm sorry, is not reasonable.
We are working to get someone else trained for that as we speak. So we're going to have more people doing that. And again, anytime we speed anything up or expand any type of service, that's staff. So yes, that is in the planning.
It is in the planning, so it's going to
Absolutely.
happen.
It's absolutely in the planning.
Okay, glad to
More
have that on
plan
record.
reviewers, that is correct. Because we have a ton of restaurants in the county and the district right now.
Right,
Yep.
thank you.
Ms. Michaels?
If I can back up on this private sewage here, as I'm looking at your matrix, I understand that the current fee is $200, and with inflation, it would be like $297. But it looks to me like it's more than double or more than quadruple the fee increases that you're proposing, which I think is just ridiculous, and it would be very hard. It's right here on your page 14. You're going from $200 to $450, $200 to $600, $750, and even $900 for non-residential, which at this point are all at that $200 level. So I think the percentage of increase is just way out of whack with what would be reasonable for a person to handle should they need to use this service.
Okay, these, and I'll explain what those are. So right now, these are specific construction, these are construction activities. So your first one is your residential, but when you get up to the ones at the bottom, these are like seriously engineered projects. These aren't just, you know, a regular little septic system, and I am not the one to get in to tell you about the differences in them, because that is not my thing, but there was a reason why these went into it, and it had to do with the complexity of the systems and the time it takes to work on them and the cost of the systems themselves. I mean, we're talking big systems, and they're kind of rare. I mean, they're not really.
Yeah, I understand part of that, and of course, the engineers are involved in all of that nature, and they might be a little bit more expensive, but let's just even look at residential. When you're going from $200 to $450, that is a huge bite for residents when you're wanting to promote building and new structures and new homes and whatnot. I just think that the percentage that you're requesting it doesn't fall in line with other things or as other natures would have them. You yourself show an inflation amount of $297.50. So why the $450? That's an extra $153. I understand that you're maybe wanting to pad your fund for
No.
down the road, but we all have that problem coming forth, and I don't want to see it all on the residential homeowner taking on a bite like that. That's just one of many things that come into play when somebody's building a house, and that's quite a bit of an increase. That's just, sorry,
No, it's okay.
it's a rule.
I mean, I don't know. All I can tell you is that, you know, the county board is supposed to look at this every so many years, and that as it stands now, tax dollars are subsidizing private homeowners and businesses. So, I mean, that's a decision that I guess you guys have to make, but that is how it is.
Mr. Hauser?
So I don't expect you to have exact numbers off the top of your head, but what would you expect kind of the breakdown be for new septic systems in just an existing home that's putting in a new system versus new construction where they're putting in a septic system? Like for the residential one, I assume that this could be either for existing homes that are putting in new septic systems or for new construction that needs to put in a septic system as well. It could be either one, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
I honestly, I don't know.
That's
don't-
fair enough because
I
it's a
can't-
pretty specific question. But
Right.
I think it's important to keep in mind that I would assume that most of these would be new construction, and if we're talking about an extra $150 when you're constructing a new house, it's not a whole lot of money when you're looking at the grand scheme of things. So I get that it's a big jump, but again, most of these I would assume are new construction, and that's really not that much money in the grand scheme of things. So I'm on board with this. I get the mindset that really we're subsidizing private businesses and homes for a service that we're doing them, and it seems like at a pretty good rate right now. I would assume that those $900 ones are going to be very, very uncommon, especially compared to residential ones.
Right,
So,
they would be uncommon, and I can't tell you exactly how many of them there are like that, because I don't do that every day. but-
right. Yeah. So that's all I have.
Ms. Michaels?
I guess my next question would be, where and how did you come up with these figures? Because they're way out of whack with our counties that are around us and what they're charging for things.
Well, it's based on, what I said back here is what they started to do was look at what the fees what it actually costs to do the services. So that is where that came from. And other health departments, you guys haven't upped it in 20 years, or 19 years, so I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of county health departments that don't look at that regularly. I think that, we get a fee and we just don't pay attention to it that often, but it came up.
Mr. Anderson? And Max?
Sure, just brief. A lot of good comments have been made. But maybe it's just me, but I have a problem with the characterization that the county is subsidizing private residences and businesses. It is those private residents and businesses that provide us with the tax dollars to allow this engine called the county government and our greater economy in the county to move forward and prosper. So I don't see us subsidizing it. I see us as facilitating their growth. But the characterization, I think, brings a negative on these residences and businesses that are actually the core of what allows our economy to thrive. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't mean to indicate that they are not important, but what I'm saying is that the county, the 0.3 or whatever I showed up there, that is the tax rate that you're taxing right now, is already covering all kinds of stuff, because it is covering all the core services. So on the place where fees are set, I'm just showing that you're, pretty far out of line, and it hasn't increased in 19 years, and it's never really even been looked at closely, apparently, until a few years ago. And so it is, I don't know what other term to say than subsidizing it, but when you're doing things for the, because this is public health, so when you're talking about doing things for the public health, that's one thing. So the communicable disease, the everything else that you're doing, it's not specific to like a private homeowner or a private business. And a construction fee, for example, that's different. I guess like an analogy would be that if I had a home and I wanted an asphalt road to come up to my house in the country, I wouldn't expect that road to be subsidized by the county road commissioner to, my driveway. I wouldn't expect that to be Is it? Oh, well, that's, okay.
Mr. Mitchell and then Mr. Summers.
That's interesting. Okay, well,
Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, I'm going to tag on to Mr. Anderson's thought. Real properties, there's some new construction, but if you take a close look at a lot of the communities, unless you've been, had severe tornado damage, those are getting to be elderly properties. And, I've worked with the National Association of Realtors, and HUD is trying to figure out a way to be able to rehabilitate these houses in the rural communities. So when we start tacking on fees so that they can be rehabilitated, because in the rural communities, they don't have sanitary services that they have to provide their own, same as wells. So I think that what this is going to do is really going to inhibit and hurt rural communities and the growth that may take place in the rural communities. If that's your goal, then that's fine. But I think we, as a board, need to look at that, because the tax dollars that can be generated from homes in the rural communities and stimulating rural communities' growth, I think is important. So the few dollars that you don't get on your fees, you'll get back in tax dollars and increased residency in the rural areas. So I'm going to oppose it in that. So I don't think you're going to change my mind.
Mr. Summers? Steve? Oh, Brooks, Mr. Brooks. I can't see that far. Oh, Brooks.
And appreciate your here coming to clarify it. Something has been stated a number of times, it's been 19 years since there's been an adjustment, and that's not, in other categories, that's not the case. In the case of food protection, it's gone up almost 300% over since 1998 in increments, is that correct?
right, I'm talking about the.
I just wanted to
food-
clarify that because
right.
some board members were under the impression that nothing had been changed since then. And then with the new increase, it'd be over 300%. With the second thing I'm going to ask about is in the case of food protection, some single units have up to 3 or 4 licenses in their unit, and each of those would go up that $50. Is that correct?
What would an example be?
An example would be a Meyer that would have a grocery license, a deli license, a Jamba Bar license, and maybe a sushi license. So each of those would go up to $50. Is that correct?
That's correct, I would
So,
assume.
The reason I asked that is a retailer that happens to own a number of stores in town contacted me about this, and he has in his 4 stores a number of licenses, and it'd be burdensome. He's still a small business, even though and it's privately owned business, and that seems significant to raise one store $200 because they have 4 licenses. I understand the increments of the small store that's small, medium, and large stores, but for a large store where you're required to have a number of licenses, that seems pretty intrusive.
But you do know that there's more work in that, because it's essentially 4 different areas that have to be regulated. It's not just like 4 because it's a big place.
No, I understand that, but
Okay.
yeah, they may be required for one little tiny section to have a license that's $400 now, or $450, and maybe their Jamba Bar is one little place. So I understand that there's different places, but the requirement for multiple licenses that all go $40, $50 is intrusive, especially out in the smaller businesses in the county that still have some square footage. So that is significant, and it is not $50. It may be $150 or $200 or $300, depending on how many licenses they're required to have. The second thing I'm questioning, I guess I'm concerned about, and this is a small thing, but I understand that the late charge is going from 25 to 250. So is that a punitive or cost-based charge?
That was requested as a punitive cost.
Okay, because we said this was cost-based, and I'm a lot more comfortable being cost-based than punitive.
Well, yes, we were talking about the punitive one. Yes, that is one that was specifically brought up, and that was brought forth by the County Board of Health members specifically, that they wanted a punitive thing, and that is one. That is true.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that. Again, I am very supportive of us having healthy food and potable water in our thing. That has to be the basis of your existence, and we appreciate that. I'm just concerned that these fees go well beyond what our intention was in those couple that I've mentioned. The last thing I have, and this is, I'm certainly a misunderstanding on my part, but I appreciate you clarifying it. On page 35, we say the Board of Health shall annually, prior to the annual report, review the fee schedule to determine sufficiency and efficacy in promoting the purpose of this ordinance with respect to the criteria in subsection 12.2.1. And then the next thing in B says, this decision is a County Board of Health decision. This isn't to suggest that you wouldn't come to this county board with fee increases, is it?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No. The county board ordinance just says that the county board sets the fees and does that, and then it always has to come to the county board, because the county board is funding the County Board of Health.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your clarifications.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Brooke. Mr. Marsh.
Yes, sir.
Patsy.
I have a couple of rather large number of information questions. It's not because I don't believe in fees, and it is not because I don't think fees need to cover what they're dedicated for. And it's because of that I have my questions.
Okay.
First is, and I am guilty of this, one of the suggestions I had was looking at the CPI against what the previous fee was and the 19-year span, some less, as Mr. Marsh just pointed out. And after I put that on the table as something for us to be considering, is that I realized that nobody could explain to me how the original fees were established. And I'm hearing more and more right now in this conversation that, again, nobody can explain to us exactly how the fees are established. Even, I mean, I just quickly looked up McLean County while you were talking. I was listening. I wasn't ignoring you, but I was looking
that's
up
okay.
some other data. And one of the ways McLean County handles it is by a surcharge. So that's another component of how this could be done, in the sense that there's a foundational cost established. I mean, we do this here at the county, the recorder does it, the county clerk does it. How much does it cost to handle things that are mandated by statute that they do in their office? And I don't see those calculations. So we approve this increase. We are approving it on a foundation that we really don't understand. It's undetermined. And that annually, if it starts happening annually, from that on, all we are doing is accelerating error down the line because we don't have a good foundation. I would be far more comfortable if somebody came to me and said, look, it takes an hour, this person gets paid X amount per hour to go door to door, even door to door. And this is what it would cost. This is the additional time for the paperwork. It's X plus Y equals Z, and that's the charge. And then we're going to have a second column, a surcharge, which is what would then go into your column of additional monies to take care of foodborne illness or anything else that happens in our county that isn't being covered by the fees. That's my number one. Number two is I'm doing something egregious, which I would argue against myself as a researcher, and I was looking at McLean County. Well, McLean County is structured in a much different way than we are. It's a total county health department. We have a public health district, and we have a county health department, and I did the research. There are 7 in the whole state that are structured this way. One is Cook, so I kick Cook out. The other is Evanston, Oak Park. Those are the closest I can come to, like us, and there are 3 others in small communities. So looking at the other counties doesn't really work for us. This is a tough call, and so I go back to what we need to be doing, and that is we need to have some foundational information as to why is the fees structured in these manners so that we are solid on it. And then the other is, I hope we don't wait another 19 years and are in this conundrum all over again and having these conversations. So from those bases, I'm being asked to approve something that nobody can tell me the foundational basis for why it was X originally. You can maybe argue why it's Y now because it's X times the CPI times 19 years, but that isn't a good foundation for decision-making, so this.
I can tell you how the original ones were.
Well, how were they done?
Well, it was done based on the fact that CUPHD had been doing it forever, and you were contracting with services, so it was basically taking what it was costing the district staff to do it in the district and applying it to the county. So that's where it came from. I mean, it didn't magically just, the county board didn't just randomly pick a number.
So what was transferred from the district area to the county, was that updated, or was it just directly transferred?
Well, I think that originally they probably hadn't factored in a lot of things that, like how far some of the parts of the county are, for example, but that's what it was based on. I mean, it was based on what the fees were being charged in the district. That's where that came from.
Mrs. Pride, could you finish your presentation? Perhaps.
That was it.
Oh, okay.
Mine's done. I'm just taking questions.
Well, Jim, and then Brad.
Well, thank you, Patsy. Those were the kind of questions I asked when I was on the health board in November when these came up, that I wanted concrete information about what the costs were so they could be correlated to the cost of doing the inspections. But I wasn't given that information then either. And I've been talking about this since we came to this meeting tonight over the last 4 or 5 months, and I still don't see that information. When you brought up the issue of the $250, there's another fee, $150, for going back and doing the inspections again. That was also considered a punitive fee. And then the placard, which also had a $200 fee, which they did take out because someone made a comment when they talked about it 3 months ago. I have a problem with the CPI that, doubles. I'm not sure what the CPI number was that has been used for the last 20 years, but mostly we've seen a CPI of less than, I don't even know if it's 0.5% or 0.25% for the last 10 years. So I don't know how we get a growth in these fees that, go from 200 to 300 or whatever they're using. But these fees are way out of control. Our rural economies cannot handle these kind of fees. Small businesses in the small towns, the restaurants, especially when some of their inspections are taking 9 months to open what are very quality restaurants. And it makes no sense that it takes so long. And you brought up the issue, Jim, of are we going to hire more people? We've asked that question for the last 3 months they've been here, and they still haven't confirmed the fact that they're going to hire any more inspectors. So I'm going to vote against this. If they could bring us more concrete information in comparisons to these fees and what the other counties around us are doing, what McLean County, other size counties are doing, then we might consider it. But we need more transparency before we continue these fees and improve these fees.
Well, regarding transparency, I honestly don't know how we could possibly be more transparent because the county board, like I said, and you were on it, everything is on, we put everything out there, and we did show you the comparisons between McLean County and the other counties. I don't know what to say. I think that there's not going to be anything that I can do that will raise a fee that will satisfy some people. And again, that's going to be your decision, but you have a Board of Health, and the Board of Health worked on this for 2 years and came up with this. All we did was provide all the input that we could and all the questions that were asked, and this is what it is.
Are there any further questions? Pius?
First, a comment. The fee for the sanitary services was not based on public health district fee.
No, those were not.
Right,
Those were based on other
because there are no
counties.
private septic systems in the health district. Well, there are some actually, but there are no new ones.
Correct.
So there's no question that
Well,
had.
there actually are new ones, but they're so rare. But we do have new ones. We actually had 2 new ones last year.
Okay, but so that fee is actually based on, they had to come up with a fee then.
It was based. The septic and the potable water were based on other counties.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
But all the food things were simply based on,
Sure, I mean, that makes sense. They were based on what the district was doing.
but again, it was the other counties, and you have to look at what the other counties do and then what we do, because needless to say, our costs are different than DeWitt
Oh,
County, for
sure, and
example, or
also,
Pike.
we don't know when they last updated their fees either.
Correct,
They could be
correct.
dealing with fees that are 20 years old for all we know.
Right.
So there's that problem too. It makes it a little bit hard sometimes.
Mm.
My question is my assumption is you want to increase fees so you can get to the fund balance or maintain the fund balance to a certain point.
No, that's essentially not what it is. The point of the increasing these fees is that they're not covering cost, and in the county, and the ordinance, and the county
Okay, all
board has
right.
been looking at, is that,
Basically, you're trying to follow the ordinance.
correct, you're supposed
Okay.
to, on the things that fees, because you cannot charge fees on everything, only certain things can have fees charged to, and those are supposed to be looked at, and you're supposed to be getting as close as you can, within reason, to covering the cost of those.
Okay, what happens if we don't increase fees?
You continue on with what you're doing.
I mean,
Eventually,
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, if the fees aren't increased, it's either going to mean, less staff, or it's going, well, the same staff, more restaurants and less staff for that thing, or you'll either have to raise taxes or just eat into the fund balance, which I don't want to be done for.
okay, so eventually we'd eat into the fund balance.
Right, right.
Okay. And so what happens then if we have a norovirus outbreak in, say, Gifford schools, where half the staff and half the students go home sick?
And there was no money in the county board of health budget?
What happens then?
Well, then we would have to come to the county board and say, here's these expenses.
Okay. And if we say no, what happens then? I'm just
I
speculating.
don't know, honestly.
I mean, would that mean you say no more inspections of restaurants? Is that a possibility?
Oh,
Out in the county?
you mean if you didn't, let's say.
Let's say we run out of money.
Okay, this is getting all kind of, yeah. I mean, if there's no.
Just think theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the county board of health, or the county board, is contracting for services
Mm-hmm.
with the district. So, if at some point it's not covering costs, then I'm not an attorney, but I would suppose there would be something related to the contract and the fact that that's not being met. But in order to be a certified health department, you have to do those 4 services. Those have to be done.
Okay.
You don't have to do anything else that we do, any of the other programs that the district does, and you guys don't do. You don't have to do those. But the 4 services you do have to do to be a certified health department in order to be able to tax and in order to get the local health protection grant.
Okay, all right,
So
thank you.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Mr. Clemens and then Mr. Esri.
Okay, first I'm going to start, you guys. I've told you this before. I built a house 3 years ago. I put my own septic in. I'm going to explain to you what required to put the septic system in. First thing I did, I called a soil classifier. He come out, took soil samples. I then went to public health, got a permit. On the permit, it tells you everything you need to do. I have no college education. I am not an engineer. I was smart enough to figure that out. Filled out my application, turned it in. Within 15 minutes of being there, I was approved. I had one site visit. He was there 15 minutes. That was it. I was done.
And-
$450 for less than an hour's work.
Well, and I know that you mentioned this at the last time, and the only reason I know about it is because Jim had mentioned it. Michael Flanagan was actually the one who did it, and he went back into his records, and that is not the case. That is not what his records show at all. So.
Yeah, I did my own
mean-
permit and did it all myself. I think I still have the permit.
Mr. Esri.
Yes, thank you. I guess more of a comment as a representative of one of the rural districts that is served by the county health district. I'm not hearing any of my constituents say, please raise fees. If anything, I would be hearing them say, please lower our taxes. And I guess I can even go back to when the health department was founded. The rural community said, no, thank you. It was the cities. I'll remind people again, I've said it before in this boardroom. It was the urban areas who had no, I know, I mean, it's the way it goes, but the urban areas who had no skin in the game because it did not affect their property taxes, the urban areas said, oh, sure, make a health department. It doesn't affect us. We have a Champaign-Urbana Public Health Department that does the exact same things, so why not vote for it? I don't see anybody saying, please raise our fees. And to tie back in with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Mitchell's comments, yeah, I don't agree with the whole subsidizing either. We're paying for staff. So the subsidizing, that I don't really agree with that. And with Mr. Mitchell's, it would be interesting to know on new construction if you, say, take a bare 3-acre piece of ground and build a brand new house on it, and the increased taxes because of that new house, how quickly you would recoup the fees. I'm sure that hasn't been done for this specific time, but it could probably be done fairly easily. How quickly you would actually recoup in your taxes the proposed extra fee, and then from then on, it's gravy because you're getting the taxes every year. So I don't see voting for this, and I'm going to oppose it.
Mr. Heiser and then Mr. Harkey.
I would actually ask that we call the question.
Okay, we're going to get a roll call. We got a first and a second.
Point of order, we
moved
need a vote on the previous question.
Pardon?
We would need a vote on whether to call the question.
Okay.
It's not automatic, Mr. Chairman. Other people have an opportunity, should have an opportunity to speak.
Okay, could I get a vote for call to question? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? That was pretty close. Could I get a roll call on the call to question? Show of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion fails. Okay. Mr. Heiser and then Mr. Harkey.
Yeah, I want to point out one thing. The CPI for last year was 2.4%. Second thing I wanted to ask Ms. Pride, if a child gets sick in Mahomet and goes home and passes a virus, say, on to their parent who works in Champaign, will that virus come across the city boundaries from rural Champaign County into the city of Champaign? Thank you.
Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments. I mean, virtually every public agency is funded by a combination of taxes and user fees. So when we talk about subsidies, what you're talking about is really basically having to make a good faith effort between balancing who pays and who benefits. So in general, you want things that are benefiting to everybody to be financed by taxes that everybody pays. You want things that are going to benefit a specific property owner or a specific project to be funded by user fees that the person who benefits from that is going to pay. Now, obviously, you can't do this perfectly. Most agencies are funded by a combination of both and have restrictions in terms of what they can charge for this, what they can charge for that. I mean, an exception would be something like the sanitary district, which is fee only. They don't collect any taxes, but they still have all these same issues. And in fact, shortly before I was on the board, they struggled with the same issue, which is they hadn't raised the connection fees in 20 or 30 years. And so they had to try to figure out what an appropriate value was. And about the best way you can do that is determine, you know, whether you're actually covering your cost or not. These fees, you know, I don't know how many meetings we've had about this so far, but, you know, these came from a recommendation based on input from the CUPHD staff, who's under contract to the County Board of Health. My understanding is there were consultants involved. The County Board of Health, my understanding is a substantial majority of that board is supportive of these fees. I've seen changes that have been made in response to the feedback that they've gotten from previous meetings. I see a pretty extensive effort here to answer. I mean, I'm sure they didn't answer everybody's questions, but a pretty extensive effort to answer these questions. So I almost go to one of the last things that Ms. Pride said, which is, you know, what do we want? Is there anything that's gonna make us happy here? You know, this seems to me, obviously, nobody wants their fees raised, nobody wants their taxes raised, but I don't see that I feel like we're kind of on the border here between exercising our oversight role and micromanaging. And these are really high, or these cost too much, or I don't understand where these numbers come from, doesn't seem like a compelling reason for me to believe that the CUPHD and the County Board of Health don't know what they're doing in terms of making this request. So obviously, you never want to put a burden, more of a burden on landowners than you have to, but, the fund balance for this organization does not appear to be unreasonable. It's not like they're making a profit, and I think it's reasonable to, in this case, trust that they have some expertise in terms of being able to identify how much what they're doing costs, or at least to believe that they have more of a basis for doing that than we do. So, I was all in favor of looking at this with a maybe not a microscope, but at least a magnifying glass from the start. But at this point, I feel like we've gotten to the point where we've probably held their feet to the fire about as much as is appropriate. And I think at this point, this seems to be a reasonable and good faith effort on their part. Some of the fees are going up substantially. Well, that's what happens when you don't raise fees for 20 years. So I am certainly would not be happy about having to pay these. I'm not happy about having to pay anything, but I don't see a compelling reason not to move forward with this at this point.
Well, I don't know that what we've seen, the information we need to determine what the fee should be. And I think that's the point. And they are just contracted. The people that are actually doing this work actually work for CUPHD. They just are contracted by us to do the inspections and those things. And what we're doing is raising the fees to determine how much money the CUPHD receives. Not just from us, but from the people that are in the county and working. So, and they're determining how much money the CUPHD has. And even in her discussion of how much they need for the on-hand balance, it was just an example. It wasn't something that was concrete of an example of something that happened in the county that they had to deal with. I forget which exactly they used. What she used as an example is something that just might happen. If something did happen, we could come to that. But they will continue to have their balance, which has been growing over the last 4 or 5 years. The cost of these fees, as she said, hasn't been emergent. They just they're just asking for a fee structure increase, which is significant, and will impact the costs or the growth of housing and business in our county and the revenue to this county, because that growth in our economy won't happen if it's slowed, as been suggested by others on the board. So I'll vote no.
Okay, are there any further questions? Then can we move to the vote? Patsy, last one.
Yes, I have one last question. What assurance can the county board have from the county health board that it won't be another 19 years to get this done and we won't have to do this kind of wrestling?
Well, I would definitely be suggesting that we do it every few years, certainly. They're supposed to look at it every year, and they do with the budget and see if anything's out of whack. But I think that we can I know that it's been brought up in the past, but it's never progressed. So again, we're doing it now, but the County Board of Health sets its agenda, but I can encourage it that this be on it in the future every year. That's about all I can say with that. But I do want to stress that the fund balance is not CUPHD's fund balance. The fund balance is the Champaign County Health Department's, the Champaign County Public Health Department's fund balance. That is not for CUPHD to use, nor can we touch it. The only way that we would get to that would be in the case of a grant falling through or an emergency. And we certainly have had, I didn't put it in there because I just didn't put it in there, but we have had a significant norovirus outbreak in Rantoul in the past that cost many thousands of dollars to mitigate it. There were a lot of hospitalized ER visits from kids. There was norovirus. It was in a huge facility up there. And so, I mean, we certainly do have, you can't predict where they're going to come from or what it's going to be. You just can't predict that. but we have had one up there, and it was a large one. So, I mean, it's important to have money put back for those things because we don't know what it could be, whether it's going to be a flu pandemic, whether it's what it's going to be, we just don't know. We just had a weird one recently, a soul hantavirus in pet rats. I didn't even know there were pet rats. I didn't even know that existed. And we have a ton of pet rats in our community. We ended up having to euthanize over 170 of them. And I didn't even know that existed at all. And it's the first time in the United States that soul hantavirus has been found in pet rats. That's never happened before. So, I mean, weird stuff in our world, weird stuff happens all the time. You just have to have money put back from that. That's not having anything to do with the fees. That's just the fund balance I'm talking about.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to the vote.
No, I think I'd like to ask her a question. So how long ago did the neurovirus happen, and did the fund balance grow back, and did the other one happen in the county, or did it happen in the?
It happened in the county. It was at Lincoln's Challenge. It was in the newspaper. It was a very large outbreak. The county ended up not paying for that. CUPHD actually paid for that, and that's too long of a story to get into, but I don't know the exact date. It was certainly well known. Yeah, it hasn't been. I think it's been longer than that, longer than 2 or 3 years ago, but it's been within the last 5, certainly.
Steve Summers, you haven't spoken.
Okay, now I'm on. In your information packet, you talk about how your local health protection grant has not been paid yet this year. Do you have any idea or anticipation of when that will be paid, and any plans on making accommodations for a continued delay on that?
Well, we are dealing with the state of Illinois, so it's anyone's guess. But I do expect that we will get it, certainly. We're in the business of giving the state of Illinois interest-free loans. We've been doing it since I've been around public health. It's just something that has to happen all the time. So we will get it. We continue providing services, assuming that we will get it. But in the event that it should not come in, then obviously things would have to change, and we would need money to fund those things. But yes, I do anticipate it coming. I call all the time, and I keep getting the checks in the mail, or it's in the queue. Checks in the queue is what I always get.
Thank you.
Okay. Could we get a roll call on this one? All those in favor to request approval of the ordinance amending fees under the health ordinance of the Champaign County? Could I get a roll call on that?
Point of order. I don't think we actually had did we have a motion? Okay, all right.
We had a
okay, all right,
first
okay.
and a second.
All right.
Coert. Esri.
Nay.
Goss.
No.
Harper. Hartke.
Yes.
Heiser.
Yes.
King. Marsh.
No.
McGuire.
No.
Michaels. Mitchell. Patterson. Petrie. Rector. Summers.
Yes.
Weibel. Alex. Anderson. Clemens. And Rosales.
Yes. Passes.
It's a tie.
Okay, I'm lost. I thought you already voted on this earlier. What was that vote for? I thought you already voted for it, and it was a no.
10-10. Okay. Motion fails. Okay, next item, County Clerk. I move to place the report, County Clerk's report on file. And D, County Administrator, Rick Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Rosales. Item 1 is the Administrative Services Monthly Report for April 2017. I would ask that, unless there's an objection, that that report be accepted and placed on file.
Could I get okay, you asked to be placed on file? So moved.
Second.
Second by Diane. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Great.
Item 2, recertification of the IMRF eligibility list for elected officials. I put a memo in your packets that explains this in great detail, but let me just briefly review what this is. Normally, from time to time, the county is asked to certify which elected county officials are eligible to participate in the retirement system. The last time the county board addressed this was in 2008. However, some changes to state statute in the last year encouraged the IMRF to change its policy, and it is now requiring recertification every 2 years of those officials. What I would recommend is that, assuming this is adopted, that following the next election in 2018 in December, that become a regular practice to do the recertification at that time. I'll be happy to answer any other questions that people may have on this.
Okay. Was there a motion? Okay, who would like to move this item? Mr. Goss, and Anderson, second. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes.
Item 3 is nursing home temporary job descriptions. As you will recall, when the board previously considered the issue of management of the home, there were a couple of thoughts on this. One was that we ought to seek qualified individuals to put in place to manage the Champaign County nursing home, particularly in the administrative area and also management. So what I've done here is I've drafted a couple of job descriptions. They are rough drafts. These were presented to the Nursing Home Advisory Board last night, so I bring them to your attention tonight to take a look at what these do. It splits the areas of responsibility along the lines that we've already established through the management contract with MPA. So the nursing home administrator job description follows what we've had in place previously when we did have an employee doing that work, and then the operations manager identifies the specific duties related to business operations, billing, compliance, other things that are typically handled by the operations folks. So I'll be happy to answer any questions on this also.
Rector.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a reason. I'm curious why, looking at this maybe in 3 or 6 month increments, is there not the ability to do a professional contract where they're not employees? Is there a reason we have to look at them as employees for the county, or can they be short-term contract-based? And I'm not questioning your decision. I'm just looking for the explanation on that. Thank you.
The reason I brought this up is I think this is also perhaps one of the most expeditious ways to get someone in place. As you know, the management agreement with MPA expires at the end of June, and I want to have some options. When we get further down into the agenda, you'll see also that we're going to propose an RFP be let for management services. I think that's another option we need to look at, and based on some of the discussions I've had with staff at the nursing home and potential losses we may see over the next period, the next month or two. Because of some of the uncertainty surrounding the home, some people are looking for other situations outside of the county.
Diane?
I'm kind of along the same line there. If they are considered employees of the county, how does that work with regards to benefits? And when it is time, if there is a change, is there a protocol that lets them get notice for leaving, or if they reapply to stay on, or things of that nature? Because once somebody's an employee, usually there's quite a long list or line of things that you have to do if their job changes, whether they reapply or whatever it is.
Let me clarify on this also. These are specifically cited as being temporary positions, so the benefits don't apply that they would to regular county employees. So we're not going to be paying for IMRF or anything else, just statutory benefits like Social Security, the ones that we have to do. Any other questions?
Patsy?
Well, it's not questions, it's more general comments. First of all, the suggested division is interesting to me because this is exactly a suggested division of duties that was brought to my attention by staff at the nursing home, that they thought this would be a good way to go. But in doing this, some of my concern from reading the descriptions and listening to the comments last night at the nursing home board meeting, I would encourage a very good editing of the narrative that's written in both of these to make certain that the parameters are clearly defined. And one of the things mentioned last night at the nursing home board meeting was if that doesn't happen, it's very easy to be pointing fingers at each other that X doesn't do something because Y hadn't gotten their part done, kind of thing. And I would hope that as you listen to people's comments and you do a little editing on these narratives, that you can be sure that those lines of demarcation are very clear.
Absolutely, and I did receive some feedback already from board members, nursing home board members, about some proposed changes, so I'm going to go ahead and do those, but I'm open to any other changes that county board members see fit to implement.
Pius?
Yeah, I was at the meet last night too, so you've already got those comments. The one comment I have is under on page 67 under the nursing home administrator. It says, second paragraph, the administrator reports to the chief operating officer. I think it's not clear who the chief operating officer is. Is it you? Is it me?
That's a editorial error on my part,
Okay.
but that should have been.
Not that I'm implying you don't have power, but I think it should be clear who they report to.
Yeah. No, the intent of this would be to have the nursing home administrator report to the operations manager. The operations manager would report to the county administrator.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rick, for the report. We pulled number 4. There is no other business. The chair's report, basically just as a reminder that the county board has many appointments coming up that are going to be vacant June 30th, which are Developmental Disability Board is 1 seat. Forest Preserve District Board is also 1 seat. County Board of Health, for those that want to continue further in the discussion of fees, we have 2 vacancies. Perhaps you could shed some light and some additional information. And then various cemetery boards and associations. We have 1 per cemetery board, so please do tell your friends and associates, colleagues, to go ahead and complete their applications. Designation of items to be placed on the consent agenda are A1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Patsy?
Yes, if the county board chair could fill us in on what are the needs of applicants for the county board of health, because there's set criteria for that board.
At this time, I can't say. But they'll be posted on, when they're posted, they'll be on the notice, I'm sure. The intent of this is just to let you know that we have these coming up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, although D2 should be on the consent agenda, I believe. Recertification. Yeah. The recertification.
Psychedelic. Also on the consent agenda, it will be D2, recertification of the IMRF eligibility for elected officials. So that one will also go on the consent agenda, D2. Probando,
Okay.
probando.
Thank you, Mr. Rosales. Next up is finance. Ms. Petrie?
Could we have a 5-minute break before
Okay,
we go
let's-
forward?
Let's have a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
We have a quorum. Mr. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First item on the finance agenda are the treasurer's reports. It's monthly reports on the website, and Mr. Welch is here to answer any questions and give us his cash flow projection report. So, floor is yours, sir.
Thanks. I might mention one thing about the monthly report. Real estate taxes, if you haven't noticed, have been out. And we're in the process of collecting $332 million in real estate and a couple $1 million in drainage. So we sent out 74,000 bills. We're about 5% collected already. Each 1% is $3.3 million. So things are progressing quite nicely. Thank you to those who have paid. All right, let's talk about cash flow. I'm going to talk about both nursing home and the general fund, since I believe they're both linked, obviously. But I want to talk about, we're first going to show you where we stand as of today. This is as of the end of business today. So if you look at the top column there, this is the nursing home, remember. Our cash balance right now is $240,000. Now, this is a payroll week, so on Thursday I'm going to have to cover payroll. I can tell you that we've had 9 payrolls so far this year in Champaign County, and the average payroll for the nursing home was $237,000. But their last payroll was $228,000. So when you see the projections, I'm using the $237,000 figure. So that's doubled, obviously, since we haven't had any payroll that actually has occurred yet. So maybe I can follow it down a little bit. So that was this figure, $475,000. That's what we're projecting their payroll is going to be for the month. And so on this week, we're expecting $235,000. So we go down to accounts payable. This is, if you look to the right, it says $487,000. That's the average of the last 4 months of what they've had payables, what their actual payables have been. The 398 is the 487 minus what they've already paid out. We've already had one accounts payable against that particular number. So who knows where that will go. Next, we talk about, let me go down to another number here. Down on the bottom left, that's what their real estate levy is this year, $1,206,000. Okay? Do we also remember that they've already borrowed 85% of that? So the $1,021,000 is already in that $240,000 figure. Okay? So we show the revenue coming in down here at real estate distribution time. We'll start like at the 30th of May, we'll have first money going into the different bank accounts of the different taxing districts. So as you see, $84,802, but when we get it in, we turn right around and pay it back to the bank because they've already borrowed against it. So they get $1,206,000, they borrowed $1,021,000, and they asked for $150,000 advance on the real estate taxes last month to make payroll and so forth. So they've used up all their real estate levy. There is nothing else. All right, so let's go down to revenue. If you average the last 4 months, 907. One thing that I do, in March, if you remember, we had a $181,000 IGT payment, intergovernmental transfer, which was early and unexpected. So I take that out of the equation, so we're not averaging that as well. So far they've received some money during the month, and that's why the 907 is down to 658. So we show an ending balance for the month if everything came in the way it says it's supposed to, if we got all the revenue we're supposed to, if we spent all the payroll and the payables, and we got our real estate money, the ending balance would be $24,617, which is pretty tight. Yeah.
And did your projection include the last part of May when we get our Medicaid payment also?
Well, I guess you could say it would be part of the revenue projection. I mean, those numbers, the revenue numbers and the accounts payable numbers are projected numbers from MPA. Okay, So I'll couch that a little bit because I started this in April, so I took their numbers for April and I did them and came to the end of the month and they missed their revenue projections by $293,000. So I was projecting, if you just looked at basically the numbers that they'd give me, that we would have had about $250,000 at the end of the month, ended up at 80. So I said I wasn't going to do that again, so I decided to not take their number particularly. I went and actually just averaged the 4 months that we've had so far, January through April. And let me show you how to do that. So if we go over to let's go left here. So we go back to January. We ended 300,000, that was our balance, 318 in February, 157, and then we ended up at 8802 for April. So if we go out here further, if you look at the top, that's expenditures at the top, January, February, March, and April. The May is just a partial so far this month, so I've just averaged those first 4 months, and that's how I've gotten the expenditure number. If you look at the bottom, the 937, 915, the 1,106, and the 671, that's the average for the revenue. So that's what I'm using. When I show you General Corp, you'll see why that's a little problematic, because your true cash fund flow, true cash flow analysis would be over several years, many months, and we don't have that because the census was different last year. All the things that you would hope that you could average would throw everything out of whack. So we're trying to work about what do we know right now, okay? So next thing to remember is the board has authorized the general fund to loan the nursing home $250,000 when they need it. We have not used it yet, and we're not going to use it this week. General fund, you gave us the authority to borrow $1.5 million from public safety. We have not used that. Were it not for the nursing home, I don't think we would have to borrow this year. But if you're going to take $250,000 from the general fund, yeah, we're going to have to borrow a little bit. So I don't look at anything in isolation. When I look at the nursing home numbers, I'm thinking about the general fund and what the effect is on that as well. So if we're $240,000 and the payroll is going to be, say it's going to be $225,000, it was $228 last time, and their payables this week are only under $13,000. Now remember, they have almost $3 million in unpaid bills, and their payables this week are under $13,000. So we're not making much headway on that. So I look at this, and you can see out to the end of December, they're basically losing $100,000 a month. If these numbers all held up, and they're projections, remember the projections, they're purely projections, it shows an $854,000 negative. So when we look at General Corp, that's what we need to be reminded of. Are we willing to remember that we're going to potentially need $800,000, almost $900,000 to keep it afloat if things did not change? And things can change. Obviously they can, but we don't know that yet. So let's look at the general fund. As of today, right now, the general fund itself has $27,000 in it. $27,000. But the bank account has more than just the general fund. It has capital asset of $963,000, and it also has the last construction fund of $295,000. And the general fund, our payroll is about $850,000 every 2 weeks. And these payables and the revenue are based on real numbers, as I'll show you. If we go out here to the side, look at all this information that we're going to base it on. We're going all the way back. I've got by month for all those different years, and we average the last 3. And that's how we get numbers that are fairly, I think they're fairly accurate, because we're looking at a lot more data than we were looking at on the nursing home side. So when you see the payables, it's based on 4-year averages from 2013 through 2016 for each month. Each month, as you can see, changes from $1.5 million to $1.236, $1.349. So, and the same with revenue. In real estate distribution, we're at $10,794,000 is what we're going to collect this year. And so, as you can see, those really help when they start coming in. if you look down at the bottom where it says 19.46, that's what our first distribution was last year of real estate money. So it could be a little bit more than that if a big mortgage company paid at the end. So we're going to get $2.1 million of real estate money. That should be in the bank on May the 30th. So when I look at this, I see an ending cash balance of $2,460,000 based on receiving $2.1 million at the end of the month, which seems very tight to me. So I would expect that we'll have to borrow. And as I say, you've given us the authority to borrow up to $1.5 million. I don't think we would have to have that much. But that's something that we're keeping track of on a daily basis. So you get at the end of the year and it shows, $5.7 million, and that's an estimate. These are based on, these are based on averages, not real numbers. It also shows, of course, that we're going to pay the debt service for the nursing home and not get paid back. This is also another debt service that we pay in June, just the interest payments on 2 different debt services. The nursing home itself is $21,335, and of this $424 out here, it's $261,335. But I'm assuming they're not going to pay us back. They didn't pay us back on the $262,000 that we paid for them last January. So I'd be glad to answer any questions that you'd like, but looking at the two, it's obvious that if you gave the nursing home the $250,000, let's go ahead and just plug it in. How does that change? Okay, so that gets you up to August, but your August balance is still only $84,000 at the end of the month. So everything would have to work out perfectly timing-wise to have a positive balance. So you're already spent your $250,000 that you've allowed the nursing home to get from general fund, and they're already in need of more money, and you haven't authorized any more money. That's the position I find myself in. So the question I would have to the board would be, how far are you willing to get into the general fund to sustain the nursing home? And that's not a philosophical question, that's a question of numbers, because I'm going to have to potentially fill in that gap of $600,000 at the end of the year. So I hope that's not too detailed, and I'd sure be glad to answer any questions. I'll leave you with this. You got a lot of big, important decisions to make. I really understand that wholeheartedly. If there's anything that I could do to help you understand the numbers, if you wanted to come into my office, I'll give you the one-on-one. I'll answer every question that you could have. You could email me, you could text me, you could come in. You don't need an appointment, just stop on in. I'll take whatever time I can to do to help you with that. Now, Patsy might make me want to eat those words. Just kidding, just kidding. But I'm serious about that. I'd really be glad to help you. I don't have a dog in the fight. I just want to give you the best information that you can make an informed decision about. So any questions that you have now, I'd be glad to take them, and anything later, don't hesitate.
Any questions for the treasurer? Mrs. Petrie, and then Mr. McGuire, and then Mr. Anderson.
A couple of information questions. If I'm listening carefully, you are with your assumptions and projections that the hit to the general fund at the end of the year, if things progress as you are using up there, it's a $600,000.
Well, yeah, right. I mean,
is that basically right?
Well, I had 250 already plugged in there, which leaves you at 600 at the end of the year. So
Okay.
I think the number that is up there right now is probably as accurate as
Okay.
Because they're going to supposedly they're supposed to pay the 250 back, right?
Right.
So there's 854.
Okay. All right. Where I'm going with my question is, once before in the history of the nursing home, the county forgave X amount of money. Can you help us? Many of us weren't on the board at that time. Can you help us wrap our heads around what that did in straining the general fund and what the county had to do to adjust things accordingly because of an additional strain on the general fund, and approximately how long that took to bring things back to a level? And my second part of this, and this is really like Aladdin's lamp right here because of what we're reading is potentially going to happen with the state, and we don't know how it'll play out, but some of the things that we're reading about and they're talking about will also have implications on the county, and if you might just give a comment or two on that potential.
Well, historically, we're talking about the period between 2007 and 2009. The board at that time, the nursing home had lost their fund balance, which was really their depreciation fund. At one time, it had as much as $1 million in that depreciation fund. By 2005, it was at zero, and it still never had a dime in it since then. So the 2007, the nursing home opens the new nursing home February 2007, I believe. Cash flow is still bad, got some financial problems. So the board at that time authorized $1,583,000, I think off the top of my head, in transfers to keep them afloat. After that, they decided that for anything from that point on would be in the form of loans. The number eventually got, with the transfers and loans, up to just under $3 million. And that basically was the nursing home taking our fund balance, the general fund's fund balance. And so we were in a position, when we talked about, I talked about earlier, you've given us the authority to borrow $1.5 million from public safety. That's in a normal year, plenty. Last year we didn't borrow. Most years we borrow $1 million, but we pay it back first part of July when real estate money comes in at the end of June. We'll have over half of our real estate tax money distributed to us. So at that time, we pay it back. When you've lost your entire fund balance, then you're borrowing for more sources for a longer period of time, with the idea that you're not going to get that money back. You're going to have to adjust something. You're either going to have to get more revenue or you're going to have to make cuts. At that time, with the leadership of Deb Busey and the larger departments, we were asked to cut our departments by 6%. Now, Mr. Heiser, I think, pointed out correctly last time I was here that there was also a recession going on, so it wasn't not all directly the nursing home's fault, but certainly it was a big part of it. And so the nursing home and general fund, nursing home had no fund balance, general fund had no fund balance itself, and at certain points in time, we had less than $50,000 in the general fund bank account, when your payroll every 2 weeks is $850,000. So that gives me shivers at night still thinking about it. So when I see us go through this exercise now, I'm reminded of all those things. Different circumstances, different reasons, but basically the same thing. And so when I asked earlier, how far would the nursing home or would the board be willing to get into the general fund to sustain the nursing home, it's really the same question. It's the same question we asked back then. History tells you that you don't want to go back there again, because remember now, the general fund's already paid $262,000 for the debt service. They've paid $226,000 for the boilers. My last look at their almost $3 million in unpaid bills, the general fund was owed $530,000. So that's already over $1 million right there. I haven't heard anybody say anything about getting repaid. So that $1 million, as of today, is going to come off of our fund balance. That's where it came from. So you add another $250,000, which you've already authorized, so you're up to basically $1.3 million. So if you wanted to start next year with a healthy fund balance of what we hope is 12.5% and hopefully higher in the future years, you're talking about $4.5 million. And all of a sudden you take $1.3 million off of that. So what are you doing? You're borrowing internally from our other funds, and you're borrowing for longer periods rather than just a couple of months, 60 days possibly. For this year, we're borrowing maybe all year. And then eventually it's going to come up when you start the next year, January 1, 2018, and you're in a hole. And that's the message I tried to put. Does that help you at all? Now, you talk about the state, and I'm not as well versed on the state as the nursing home would be. So I don't think that I can really answer your questions about the state. I only know that Now, I will point this out, that we talked about IGT money last time, and that is intergovernmental transfers. So I've highlighted that area, and if you remember my comments last week, MPA, or last month, MPA told me that they would like me to budget $100,000 a quarter. So I did that. Well, I talked to him today, and he said, well, we don't have that in our, we don't have that, we don't do that. They're not part of our projections, so I took them out. And so that's how I did it. I mean, I don't have the years and months of back numbers that I have in the general fund. So you got to take what you have, and that's the last 4 months of averages. It's not perfect by any means. We get to the end of the year, that 854 could be dramatically different. What if the state started paying again? They're losing 100,000. Well, yeah, but they're losing $100,000 a month basically. If you average the last 8 months, you go from 26,000 plus to minus 854. They're losing 100,000 a month on the average. And what do we do about that? Well, we only have authority to borrow 250,000. So there's another 600,000 there that's wanting as of right now.
Ms. Petrie, is that it?
Thank you.
Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. And then I guess some of them go along the same lines, but I'll start with monthly revenue. Does that include both the Medicaid payments and what people are individually paying? I mean, that we're currently getting. So that number could change, like you said, either up or down.
Sure.
Based on the
Yep. I mean, if we look down, let's take a look at I'm sorry. So so this is May, and so these are the deposits that have been made so far. This is as up to even today. So that's what they've received. That's what they've received every day, other than the 2 weekend days, obviously. So 12,000, 87,000, 22,000, 3,500, 49,000, 50, and 20,000 today. And all they've spent out so far this month, I'm going the wrong direction. They only have one check so far this month, 89,000. And we're going to add a 13,000 or 12,005 to that tomorrow. I'm sorry, this week. So yeah, that's what those are. That's the 907 minus those figures that have come in so far this month, and the 487 minus the one check that's been written for accounts payable.
and just as you said, the only thing it pays is payroll. What about Social Security, everything else?
Yeah, well, that's part of the unpaid bills.
Right.
I mean, that's a big part of the unpaid bills. If you looked at the 530,000, I don't know, maybe JJ could tell us more specifically, but they haven't paid any of the IMRF or FICA.
Well,
Remember
hold
last year they paid. Remember they got a year behind last year, and it cost them $1,026,000. They're 4 months behind now.
We'll hold off bringing in the big guns.
Yeah.
But, and even, using the $250,000 and getting to $600,000.
Yeah.
That doesn't improve care, that doesn't pay any vendors, and we're barely paying payroll.
Well, it might help pay some vendors. It could. I mean, I
It
think
might do a little
the
bit.
13,000 is a little light. I mean, that's not normal. I mean, look, if it was it 90,000 that they paid? Yeah, 89,000. That's what they paid in the last payable. So,
Right.
it's a little light.
And we don't know if any of the vendors.
When you're talking about $3 million,
Right.
15,000 or 89,000 is not taking much out of it. I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's a long way to get to zero.
And we're concerned with our own reserves.
Right.
And making any payments toward the nursing home. And the state's talking about cutting some of our, I think it's income tax payments, is a current 5-and-5 plan, and freezing of property taxes. And looking at our own budget, that's going to be an issue next year.
Yeah, because you're starting in a hole.
Right. And we're going to start without a
You're
reserve.
starting in a hole from the nursing home, basically.
Right.
That's, so yeah, that's the way I see it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Just to follow up on Patsy and Jim's references or questions. The nursing home is the issue that we've been discussing, you've been eloquently describing tonight. But I'm looking at, if you could give your thoughts, I know you can't, you're not a soothsayer, you don't know what this state's going to do, we just know how bad it is. And the solution is to cut services, funding for services, and to raise taxes. That's the only way they're going to get out from this. There doesn't seem to be any disagreement with that. How can we anticipate the county being affected by this? Their necessary actions when they're implemented with, if you will, for lack of a better term, the nursing home on our back on top of that. I mean, I'll let you. I just kind of want to get your insight because I assume you're tracking somewhat what's happening in Springfield, what the potential impact is to the county, and you may have some worries.
Well, but I don't track it any more than I'm aware of when for example, today we got income tax. I mean, I can tell you got 169,000 in income tax. I mean, those are the kind of things. I'm not tracking it, and we're 3 months behind on income tax, and maybe 1 month behind on use tax, but everything else is on a timely basis. I don't really track it. I mean, Tammy really does a lot more of that than I do. She could, I don't want to overstep my bounds here.
I guess my point is our finances, aside from the nursing home, are going to be bleak in the future because of the state's potential impacts on us with the actions they're going to have to take to straighten out their budget issues.
Yeah, I mean, I would not think that you're wrong in guessing that, but I just don't know. I mean, I've been surprised, but I don't look at it quite that specifically. I can look at the numbers and I look at averages, and I look at cash, and I call what I do the real world. And there's another world called the budget world that's hopefully everything will happen that's supposed to happen. Mine is the money in the bank, and is the money in the bank at the right day? And so when you look at the nursing home, sometimes it can be deceiving. For example, take this week. They've gotten some money in. They got a $240,000. I can tell you we got 15,000 more waiting to be put into the system. When money comes in, it's wired often, and we call the nursing home and say, can you identify this and tell us what line item to put it into? And it takes them several days. Sometimes it's taken them 3 days to find this $15,000. So that 240 is 265, some 255, 260, something like that. And that'll cover their payroll, and it'll cover their accounts payable this week. So we're not borrowing. But what if just by 1 day we were further along in the week? We'd be borrowing the 250, we'd be borrowing maybe 150 of it, and it would look a lot worse to you. And it really shouldn't, because it's only 1 day. So you got to look at it in the overall, and remember that these are projections. These are our best guesses today. And I know more every month that I do this. I learned a lot from April, and I'm going to learn a lot more from May. And I think when I come back here, as Pius has asked me to do, this is what I do. This is what I look at every day. It's exactly what I look at every day. Sometimes I stare at this screen for hours during the day saying, am I missing something? Can I be more accurate? Can I get a better projected number? And that's what I work on a lot. So when I come next month, we know exactly what May's numbers really came in at. Are we going to show that the number was plus 24,000, or we're going to be plus 250 because we had to borrow the money? And that's a timing thing as well. So take it all with a grain of salt, but that number at the end of December doesn't lie. Things don't get better as you go out further, unless something changes. And why not? Why couldn't it change?
Mr. Goss.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing this, because this is actually real world, which obviously what we get from MPA is not real world. You've demonstrated that. Because I'm new to the board, go back to the general fund cash flow.
Sure.
And we get to the end of the year, I think we were at 5.7 million.
Mm-hmm.
Where's ideally, what's that number? where's
Yeah.
a comfort level for you?
The county board made a policy decision years ago that they established 12.5% of the expenditure budget of general fund for a fund balance. So this year would be in a range of 4.5 to under $5 million. I think you'll see in your packet tonight that the financial
We're wanting to go to
things that
16.
we're talking about moving it to 16.5% as a fund balance goal. Remember, it's a goal. We got to achieve that. That's not easy to do. So the 5.7 is probably a little high as far as I'm concerned. I don't think we're going to end at that number.
Sure. Well, we don't know what we're going to have to do to keep the nursing home
Right.
open either. So
Exactly. So
that's a
by
big
the-
part. It's a
By
huge
December,
part
we're
of it.
going to know a lot more, but that number will be a lot more accurate in December than it is now,
Sure.
obviously. So, but your question is good, and that is that we would hope for about a $4.5 to $5 million fund balance. And even with that, now what that should do for us, if that was working properly, is that between January 1 and the date of the first distribution of real estate money, which this year will be May 30th, we should be able to go without borrowing. And I really think we could do that this year. We did it last year. It'd be very tight. It'd be a little tight based on timing. So I think that it would be appropriate to move that fund balance higher if we could achieve that. I mean, remember, it's a goal. It's not something you just do. But so the 4.5 to 5 million is what it should be, and that's in line with that. What we'll see at the end of the year.
Well, I do appreciate this. This is real world stuff and stuff that I do on a daily basis. So I
Yeah.
appreciate it laid out nicely. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goss. Mr. Diane, did you have anything? Mr. King? I'm sorry, who? Oh, Tammy?
Dan, that 5.7 million, does that include all three funds, capital asset? Okay, I want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of
That's
that.
a good point. That's a real good point. I mean, when you're talking about the general fund balance, it's 12.5% of the general fund. That's just the one figure in that of those three. So it's almost $1 million in capital asset and almost 300,000 in, we're talking about bank account versus budget. So the 12.5 is on general fund itself. I mean, these other two funds, I'm not sure what the budgets even would be on those. It wouldn't be on anything on the construction side, but you're talking about, what, $37 million, $37 million on general fund?
For general fund?
Yeah.
Yes, 36.4.
So take 4.5% of that, and you're talking about $4.5 to $5 million. That's a good point. Thanks.
We're gonna be challenged to meet the 12.5% at the end of this year, based on we're pretty certain that we're not going to get the debt repayment from the nursing home. We know that we may have to do additional loans, so I would not count on us making 12.5% right now.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Mr. King, and then Ms. Petrie again, if no one else wants for round one. Mr. Patterson, then Ms. Petrie.
Thanks again, Mr. Welch. I had a few questions. Sure. The first one is really just trying to, in your laying this out, if you could maybe share with us, in your opinion, is there anything, I guess, unethical or about the financial practices and things being used at this time that, sort of are moving you away from maybe some generally accepted practices, or you feel like everything is pretty straightforward?
Oh, no. I've been a county treasurer a long time, and I've been around other counties because we have an association of county treasurers. I've been around a lot of county treasurers, and I've been in a lot of counties. I hear how they do things. We're doing things right.
Okay.
We do things right. We have parameters of how to do things. We have a county auditor that watches what we're doing and doesn't just let us willy-nilly move money around. We follow the statutes. I have no concerns about that. I have zero concerns about that. In fact, I think we're a model for others to follow.
Okay, thank you. The two other questions, are there other financially challenged county service areas that are maybe not as bad as the nursing home that you could speak on as maybe vividly, I guess, or you would say might be the next closest area we should be worried about?
I would think I'd leave that to the auditor.
Okay.
That's really more their area. They see the budgets of those different departments and how they function within that money. I wouldn't venture to go outside my period of expertise here.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. And my next question may be for the auditor as well. We're thinking about this, but without a huge revenue generating area outside of the taxes, what other things, I guess, or what other areas could we generate, I guess, money to sort of help with our budget issues?
Yeah, historically in Champaign County, it's not been about raising revenue, it's been about cutting expenses.
Okay.
And we've cut our way to prosperity in the past. I don't believe that it's ever been a policy of the county board to really be looking at more real estate revenue, increasing that. It's always been department cuts. But I think that Rick would probably tell you that we're probably at the point of there's nowhere to go on that with us. So I think that you've got to be looking at things like, are we doing, you read about governments and they say, what's going to happen when this money quits coming in, we're going to start cutting services. Have you ever heard that? Have you read that?
Of course.
Have you ever seen anybody actually do it? I've never seen anybody actually that did it. So I think the exercise could be, and I think Rick's got plans to do this, look at us department by department. What are we doing? And there should be a statute saying this is what you have to do. I mean, in my office, almost everything is based on statute. So are we doing anything that's not statutorily required? Not that I know of. But that doesn't mean it wouldn't be a good exercise for every department in the county to go through that, because that's a way to cut expenses.
Thank you.
It's just not as easy as you think. 6% was a tough cut. I mean, that was the entire budget that you're talking about cutting, not just your expenditure budget. My expenditure budget in my office for general fund is $13,000. You cut me 6%, I can live with that. You cut 6% of everything, you're talking about staff. When 95 to 97% of my budget is personnel. So I think it's a great idea that Rick has to look at the what we're really required to do. It's like nursing homes, not required. What are the 22 counties that have nursing homes? So I mean, it's not mandated that you do that. But is there, that's that mission versus money that I talk about all the time. That's a huge thing here. It's a real thing.
And Mr. King, if I could add to that, one thing you're not going to see in any of the numbers from the treasurer is the accumulated deficit that we're building up in terms of facilities maintenance and capital asset replacement, which is a number that we're going to have to pay for one way or the other someday. Although it's not going to show up in any of the financial reports. Mr. Patterson, and then Ms. Petrie for round two, if nobody else wants round one.
I just had a question, some clarity on the revenue. So the 907, 596 number, where does the Medicaid, as far as that we're not getting paid for, that hasn't been processed yet, does that fall into that estimate at all, or are you just excluding that?
Well, I had it in there as the IGT. You could consider that. I mean, I think when I talked to MPA today, he said there were like 30 people at the nursing home that have qualified. They've gotten all their paperwork done, everything's done, haven't turned the money on yet. So that's huge. But MPA said that they don't budget for that. They don't cash flow it. So I took it out of mine as well. That was at their suggestion I have it in, and they said they didn't do it, so I took it back out.
Do you have any idea of those 30 people, what type of additional revenue would that add?
Yeah, Rick, there's a number in there that relates to one person per month. It's $4,000, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit at the nursing home board last night, and we're looking at, right now, the estimates are around a little over $100,000 a month we're losing because those applications haven't been turned on yet.
Okay. And do you have any idea if the census were to increase, how that would affect the revenues as well?
Yeah, I don't. But that's one of the reasons that past years is not helpful to this cash flow, because if we're at 141 today and we were at 180, I mean, obviously the numbers are skewed. So that's why we're not including them, or that's why I'm not including them in this projection here.
Okay. And do you have any idea on what type of increase in expenses it would cause if they were to increase the census?
I wouldn't know it, Rick.
Yeah, it's really hard to do those estimates because a lot of it depends on the payer mix, because there's such a variance between what a Medicaid patient would receive versus a Medicare versus private pay. So it really depends on who you get in. Of course, you can't control that. we always try to get more Medicare in if we can, because those are the best sources. But on the expense side, we have had attrition. We lost about 13 employees recently, so that's helped with payroll. You've seen the payroll has gone down some. That's something we're going to continue to look at, staffing-wise, if we can continue to support our current staffing level, or if we're going to have to look at other things. But the attrition has definitely helped us, and I expect that we're going to continue to lose some employees. So hopefully, I would hope let us avoid having to do anything like layoffs.
All right. I guess so. We don't have any you didn't organize any projections that would include us receiving our Medicaid.
I'm sorry?
Like the full Medicaid that we're owed, because you talked
you know,
about
no, the
100,000 a month.
Don't they say $1.1 million? Is that what that number is?
It's declined slightly. I think they said 950 last night.
Okay.
But it's right around $1 million.
Yeah, that is not part of the projection.
Okay. So the projection, I'm just trying to clarify. So the projection is just based on that the state does not approve any Medicaid whatsoever.
It's based on today.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll note that the rate at which it's losing money is of the same order of magnitude at the rate which we're not getting from the state. So they're comparable numbers. Ms. Petrie. Doesn't make the state start to pay, but it's an interesting observation.
Right. Well, building on that, there was a informational yet very disturbing observation that Mr. Yima made last night at the meeting, and that is, it isn't just the Champaign County Nursing Home that isn't receiving these payments. Now it's up and down the whole state of all the nursing homes. So where are we in the queue, and when do we become the squeaky wheel, and do they alternate to keep everybody somewhat happy? So even doing those projections down the line, we could do those. That's easy to do in a model. That's not difficult. But the question really is, when do we come to the breaking point if the squeaking wheel is off by a month, 2 months, as you pointed out? A day makes a difference.
It does make a difference, and it's a decision that you're going to have to make. I mean, it's a decision that you're going to have to use projections to try to figure out how far you need to advance the nursing home to subsidize it to the point where, until things change, or, I mean, the bills are going to continue to be there. There's still going to be 3 million unpaid bills. There's still going to be debt services to pay. There's still going to be employees to pay. And so nothing, as far as I can see, is more important than that payroll every 2 weeks. You've got to cover that. I don't see how they're going to potentially make the second payroll in May without some help from general fund. It doesn't seem to be making any possibility of that. So yeah, it's a real serious question. I can tell you that it's got our full attention, but you still have to authorize it. We can give you a recommendation, and I think that that's appropriate, but you got to watch these. We're watching these numbers on a daily basis. We're talking about them on a daily basis, and I can assure you that I'm concerned about it, extremely concerned about it. Because it's not just the nursing home, it is the general fund too. It's both.
Mr. Esri and Mr. McGuire.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Alex. I was just going to say the idea that while true that what the nursing home is losing and what the state owes us, you could say roughly in the same amount, that's not putting anything into a fund balance, depreciation, or anything like that. That's just barely breaking even. So we'd still be going to the corporate fund for the building, and another boiler craps out, stuff like that.
Right. I mean, it'd be like saying the worst thing could really happen here would be that the nursing home would close. That's the worst thing could happen. Then you got the debt service to pay. You've got the back bills to pay. You've got, talk about the worst case scenario. Try closing it, and then somebody come up with $14 million to do it. That's not what we want.
I'll go to Mr. McGuire here in a minute, but I was going to mention to Mr. Esri, the reason I made that comparison was I think it's an explanation for why the nursing home has been able to operate essentially at about cash neutral. It's been accumulating deferred maintenance, just like all other county facilities. But, the reason this hasn't come to a head in the last, 8 years has been that the amount of money it was taking in, plus the tax subsidy, was enough to essentially keep it going. What's putting it under unusual stress at this point is the fact that the state's been not approving those Medicaid applications and not paying for the ones that they have approved. So I think that's sort of how we, it's been a long road that's gotten us here, but that's why I made that comparison. Because the nursing home isn't doing anything, substantially different operationally this year than they were doing last year or the year before or the year before that. And they haven't been a drain on the general fund in recent years, other than as a risk in terms of facilities maintenance or some of these facilities issues like you bring up. So to me, that's I think the smoking gun as far as sort of what's put it under more stress than usual. Mr. McGuire.
Okay. You made the statement, I just want to clarify something, that you may not make the payroll in May, but you have the $250,000 to help you with that, right? I mean, we don't have to.
Right.
Okay, I just want to get
I'm
past
not,
that.
yeah, we're not in a position where we would ever let a payroll not get paid.
Okay.
That's not possible. We would do whatever it took to pay the payroll.
Well, you don't need any additional authorization for that. And I guess the $100,000 in Medicaid and the viability or non-viability of the nursing home, the nursing home's been an issue for many years. Medicaid's kind of kicked it over a little bit, and the state's payroll, but there's been operational problems with the nursing home for years we've been dealing with. It's food service and it's management. Jim Goss brings up the issue of this report, which we've complained about for years. It's just not the Medicaid issue that's been the problem with the nursing home and its operation. We have almost $4 million worth of bills here that haven't been paid, that can't be paid, and if we cut to bring it back, it would almost take a 30% cut in the revenue or in some type of operation to pay those $4 million worth of bills to get us back into a position to even start trying to improve care or to pay for the capital improvements to pay that $4 million. Because we're not paying our bills. We're not paying our vendors. We're not doing a lot to the building. And that's not $100,000 worth a year. That's not the Medicaid payments that are stopping us from doing that. That's a whole lot more than that. We have to fix this problem. We can't continue to just wait and think it's just the Medicaid.
Well, that's right. I mean, we shouldn't forget the grace of the vendors. I mean, my gosh, if they had just cut us off, we do have a crisis. Those folks have been more than patient, and we can't leave any discussion of the nursing home out without recognizing the fact that that's how the operation is being funded on the backs of the vendors.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. If there are no, I'm sorry, do you have one more, Mr. Marsh?
Just a comment. There are many nursing homes, hundreds of nursing homes in the state, run by private industry, have great care, and they're profitable. It just makes me wonder what fits. It's not statutory, but what fits in what we can do and what we should be doing, and what private industry could do. That's always a question, but there are many that are being run very profitably. And I know many people going into the business because they see the need increasing as we age out and as life people live longer.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Mr. Heiser, and then we're going to wrap this up. We've got a number of other nursing home-related items on the agenda tonight, so this won't be the last time to have this discussion.
Yeah, so just in response to the last comment, there's kind of this balance that takes place where, sure, nursing homes can be profit, but then where's the profit coming from? Is it because it's more expensive to be there, or is it because they're cutting corners in terms of care or services? So just to say that a nursing home is profitable, that's not enough, because I mean we've seen tons of examples of nursing homes that are profitable but have major health issues, both next door in Vermilion County, and then we heard of a lot of issues that our governor was tied to up in the Chicago area, where they were profitable, made tons of money off of it, but had some serious legal issues involved with that as well. So we need to keep that in mind, as always.
Okay, I'm going to indulge Ms. Michaels as her prerogative as vice chair, and then I'm going to move on.
I'll make it real quick. We also need to remember that there is a bond for the building, and that's part of the equation here, too.
Thank you, Ms. Michaels. We'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Welch. Mr. Farney, move on to the auditor's report. And without objection, we'll receive and place your monthly report on file.
So does anyone have any questions on the monthly report or the quarterly report? I'd be glad to answer that.
And the quarterly report. Any questions for the auditor? Ms. Petrie.
Would you mind answering the questions that the treasurer felt were
Sure,
beyond
I will.
his?
And I want to make sure, did
okay.
everyone receive the memo, the update, the monthly update I had on the nursing home? And it's in your packet? Okay, great. All right. And of course, I did not bring a copy of it with me. Can I steal something? Well, while I'm looking for that, to answer Mr. King's question about areas that I foresee as being trouble in the future. Thank you. A couple areas that I would look at. The state's attorney's office has some grant-funded areas that the state has taken a very long time to refund us on to pay us those grants, and those are the support enforcement area especially. That was a large amount of money that the general corporate fund basically floated for the entire year in 2016. So that's one area that just right off the top of my head. Of course, we're always looking at the employee health insurance, as we'll be seeing increases in that again this year, I'm sure. And it seems that ends up being about $1 million increase each year. So I'd say that's, $1 million increase in health insurance is the equivalent of $1 million loss at the nursing home. Somebody's got to pay it somewhere. So those are two areas just off the top of my head that I think we should be looking at. Okay. Yes.
Well, I asked Ms. Ogden this question, and since you brought it up, what does it cost the county to subsidize the state's attorney's office due to the fact that the state isn't paying that grant, which is on our...
I don't have that right in front of me, the specific numbers. I just know that the grant money doesn't come in. I couldn't tell you the exact amount that we get in that. Tammy might know it off the top of her head.
Are you asking what the budgeted expenditures are, or are you asking what the subsidy from the county is?
You can answer both.
I know that it's around $300,000 in expenditures, and I also know that the revenues do not fully cover the expenditures. I also will point out that not all of the fringes are built into that budget. There is some expenditure for health insurance, but at this point, nothing is charged to that line for health insurance, and there's not enough in that budget to cover health insurance for the employees that are in that particular budget. Also, there's no Social Security or unemployment or any of the other fringes, IMRF.
And you mentioned to me it's 4.6 employees. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Thank you.
And Mr. Farney, I think you could add the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts to your list.
Yes.
Of non-payers. I think they are in
Yes.
more in arrears than the payments to the state's attorney's
I
office.
think
at
you're
this
right.
point.
I think you're right. They
9
are
months.
quite slow. In my memo to you, I go through and talk about the money that's owed to the county by the nursing home. The home, as of last Friday, owed a total of $2.9 million to its vendors. That was an increase from the end of March of about $33,000. To the county for general accounts payable type things. So this is for goods and services the county has provided to the nursing home. Those totals included $211,000 to the general corporate fund, which was up about $1,000. The highway fund for maintenance on vehicles, $1,700. That was up about $100. And then you get into the areas where they've really seen increases, and these are areas of concern. That's the IMRF and Social Security funds. The nursing home has not paid any IMRF or Social Security this fiscal year. And that's the amount that builds up over the course of the year. And last year, when near the end of the fiscal year, the amount that the nursing home owed to pay back the county was $1,027,000. The amount of their tax anticipation warrants was $1,021,000. It couldn't cover the entire IMRF and Social Security. They are on track to do that again. The self-funded insurance fund is owed $31,000. That was an increase of $7,000 since last month. So you add in the amounts they owe for those general accounts payable type things, you add in the debt service, the boiler, and that brings your total to $1,060,000 that is owed to the county from the nursing home. The area that I'm very concerned with is this amount being this large this early in the year. We're 4 months, we're just began May, and they already owe us $1 million. By comparison, last November, at the end of November, they owed $1.3 million to us. They're going to blow that number out of the water. Okay, that $1.3 million included all of their IMRF and Social Security. So this is an area of great concern for the county, for the general fund, for the IMRF fund, for Social Security fund. As far as payments to vendors, they have been attempting to pay down some of these vendors, but unfortunately those numbers continue to grow. Health Pro Rehab, they did pay down a little bit. The pharmaceutical company, that went up. Professional Medical is the company that threatened to sue us. As you can see, that stayed the same. As of right now, they have not sued us. The bed tax continues to increase, so we're I guess I don't shed a tear about us not paying the state. Medical staffing services, we haven't done contract nursing in over a year. That's money that's owed from FY 2015. Diamond Brothers, that's our liability insurance. That's an area of great concern. Healthcare Services Group, that's your dietary provider. That went up by $60,000 in the last month. The money owed to the county does not include the $250,000 loan, so that could also increase that total. So it's not a rosy projection as far as the bills go, as far as what's come across my desk and what we've been seeing. We continue to work with the county administrator to monitor their expenses. We go over their accounts payable run each week and make sure that Mr. Snyder is aware of what's actually being paid, making sure that they're prioritizing and paying the appropriate vendors. This week's AP run, as Mr. Welch mentioned, is only about $14,000. Now, MPA's projections that they like to bring out and show, they say that they're supposed to be paying $550,000 a month in AP. And as you saw in Dan's presentation, their average is not hitting that. And this month is going to be well below that. $550,000 in 4 weeks, that's over $100,000 a week, and we're paying $14,000 this week. This is not sustainable.
Sir, I guess I'm wondering, at some point, if we were things from 15, what's ethical? I've got great concern about that.
As do I. We continue, and Mr. Marsh, since you're new to the board, you haven't seen one of these yet, but each county board meeting, at the full board meeting, you'll get a listing of payments that don't follow policy, and that will show you everyone that they're paying out of the wrong fiscal year, so that'll be in the meeting, the next meeting. The nursing home list is always the largest part of it.
Anybody else for the auditor? Mr. Snyder, then Mr. Gauss.
Just a quick comment on the list of vendors here. The Diamond Brothers bill is of great concern for us because they're also, of course, the vendor for the county's general insurance. And if this bill isn't paid at some point, I know that we're going to be hearing from them about making that good or jeopardize our entire coverage. So this could be another, it's $133,000 right now. That's another huge, that would take more than half of the loan or the credit line that we've established. right away. So that credit line could disappear pretty quickly.
Mr. Goss.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, so.
Thank you. Anybody else for the auditor? Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Petrie, yes.
Sorry, to be fair, I think I need to ask you the same question that I asked the treasurer. As best as you can guesstimate with the numbers you've been seeing over time, and the erraticacy of the payments coming from the state, when do you project we are going to have to face that tough decision that the treasurer, said the board's going to have to face?
Sure.
When do we get to a point that we can no longer sustain this? When we look at the whole picture of the county's finances.
I think from what I've seen in the cash flow projections, when we get to September, we will be in crisis mode. September is a 3 payroll month. It's 3 payrolls for general corporate funds, 3 payrolls for the nursing home. We need to have a clear path by September. Thank you, Mr. Farney. That will conclude the auditor section. Thank you, sir. And we'll move on to the nursing home monthly financial report, which I expect will be short because that's what we've been talking about for the last hour. It's included in your packet. It's from the your yellow packet. It was presented at the nursing home board of directors meeting, and of course it's from March. So all the information that we've received tonight from the auditor and the treasurer is significantly more current than what you'll see in that report. If there are no specific questions about the nursing home monthly financial report, we'll receive that, place it on file. Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to budget amendments and transfers. May I have a recommendation to send budget amendment 17-7 to the full board with a recommendation for approval? This is increased appropriations of $235,550, increased revenue of $235,550 for unemployment insurance premiums and receiving revenue from the department billing of unemployment insurance premiums. Yes, Ms. Michaels. And Mr. Goss. Motion by Michaels, second by Goss. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And may I have a motion to send budget amendment 17-8 to the full board with a recommendation for approval? Increased revenue of $18,550 from a DCEO energy rebate, increased expenditures of $123,037, re-encumbering unspent funds from fiscal year 2016 for facilities. Moved by Mr. Rector, seconded by Ms. Court. Any discussions, comments, or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. May I have a recommendation to send budget amendment 17-9 to the full board with a recommendation for approval? Also re-encumbering fiscal year 2016 money for ADA improvements at the courthouse. This is from the court's construction fund in the amount of $24,062. Moved by Ms. Court, seconded by Ms. Michaels. Comments, questions, or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. May I have a motion to send budget amendment 17-10 to the full board with a recommendation for approval? This is increased appropriations of $74,323 from general corporate on the ADA compliance line. Again, re-encumbering funds for architectural expenses and ADA improvements from 2016. Moved by Mr. Esri, seconded by Mr. King. Discussions, comments, or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Budget amendment 5, or item number 5 is pulled from the agenda. We'll move on to item E1. I may have a recommendation to send to the full board with a recommendation for approval. Approval of renewal and amendment of intergovernmental agreement between the Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services and the Champaign County State's Attorney for Child Support Enforcement Services for the term July 1, 2017 to July 30, 2018. Moved by Mr. Esri. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Heiser. Any discussions before I speak to this? Seeing none, this is the contract, one of the contracts that the auditor was talking about where we've been providing services that we have not necessarily always been getting paid for.
Ms. Ogden, my understanding is that based on what you told me earlier, is that we have been paid through February of 2017.
Correct.
So what was the longest that we went? I mean, we went basically all of 2016 without getting paid, right?
I think it was at least 8 months. It could have been longer.
Okay, do we know do we have any idea why we got paid? Was it through any efforts of our own, or was
I
it
think it was
just
a result of
happy
the
accident?
stopgap budget, I believe.
Okay, well, the reason I ask is I'm wondering what the likelihood is that this pattern will continue. This is obviously a service that people depend on. It's one that the state should be happy that we provide, because if we don't provide it, they're required by law to do it themselves. So I am supportive of this, but it's something I certainly will understand if there is discussion about. Mr. Goss.
Am I correct in saying that she added some language to that says if you don't pay us, we don't have to provide real? I think it was in our packet. But I didn't quite understand it, so that's why I'm asking.
There's always, I guess, been language to the effect that if the state didn't have appropriations, they didn't have to pay us. Can you refer me to the provision you're specifically referring to, or point me to the provision you're specifically referring to?
It's number 2, 3.1, availability of appropriation, sufficiency of funds. It's on page 84, sorry.
I'm sorry, what page?
84.
Yeah, this is the state can not pay us. The department in this is the Department of Healthcare and Family Services. Sorry.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was maybe we could say, no, we're not going to do it. But
No, I mean, I think the state certainly can decide whether or not they feel like paying us in any given month, and we could attempt to not provide the services and see what happens. But this is one of those situations where we're over the barrel. Obviously, the state's attorney wants to provide the services, because otherwise nobody's enforcing child support. So we don't have a whole lot of leverage in this deal.
I just thought it was crafty that, hey, we're finally saying you're either going to pay us or we're not going to do it.
If I thought they had a chance of being successful, I'd tell her to throw it in there. Appreciate your site. The sentiment is appreciated. Any other comments, questions, or discussion on this? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. And we'll move on to the County Administrator's Report. We have a fiscal year 2017 General Corporate Fund Budget Report. Mr. Snyder and/or Ms. Ogden.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. This information is not significantly changed from last month. We have backed out here the property taxes because of the change. We had originally planned to have additional revenues if the hospital property tax case had been settled in our favor. That's not here. Tammy, is there anything that you want to highlight on this revenue or expenditures?
You can see that in the fines line, we're continuing to project a decrease in these revenues. We mentioned this in our 5-year financial forecast. Also, on rents and royalties, you'll see a negative $75,000. And that is what we are anticipating the result of the lost space that we were renting to ILEAS as a result of the mold situation. And then also the interfund reimbursements, $282,000, is what we've been talking about in terms of not anticipating the nursing home to be able to reimburse the county for the GO bond. On the expenditure side, there's just a projection that we will slightly underspend what's budgeted at this point. Do you want me to move on to the summary?
If you'd like.
So the revenue to expenditure difference that we're projecting is a negative $376,000. We had initially proposed a budget that was negative $150,000 for the ADA improvements, and then we revised that to include the additional property tax revenue, which gave us the surplus of $361,000. We obviously know we're not going to be receiving that now. The fund balance projection for the end of the fiscal year at this point sits at $4.2 million, which is 11.7% of the expenditure budget, and again, falls below our policy of 12.5%. I did point out underneath the box that if there were capability of the nursing home to reimburse the debt service, that would improve the fund balance projection to $4.5 million and would meet the requirement of 12.5%. One thing I want to make sure that you're aware of, and I mentioned this, I think, last month, that the auditor's office is working to establish a separate fund for the foreclosure mediation program. And so there will be a budget amendment coming to the county board meeting next week that will establish this fund. And then in June, we will also see another budget amendment to move this revenue. So this will have, at this time, an approximate impact of $52,000 to the general corporate fund budget.
And Tammy, if I remember correctly, this is money that's collected, this is a program that was initiated by the state. There's a court fee on some court transactions that go into this fund, and then that fund is expended, right? There's no county contribution to this fund?
No, there is, I believe the fee is $75, but there's also a grant that's provided at this time that is anticipated to run out in 2018. There has been discussion about potentially increasing that fee because I know the administration of this program was partly being handled through the grant, which will be going away.
This is not something the county board has authority over, is that right? I mean, we can't
Currently,
choose,
it's in the circuit clerk's budget. In terms of authority, I can't speak to that, but it is currently in general fund budget.
But we didn't establish the fee, and we don't determine how the money's spent, right? I mean, if it flows through our budget.
I think that, I believe that there are specific parameters regarding the collection and disbursement of these fees, and I know that there are monthly reporting requirements, so I don't think that we have very much authority over this.
Thank you. If there are are there questions or comments related to the monthly financial or general corporate fund budget projection report? Seeing none, we'll move on. May I have a motion to accept the resolution in the packet adopting Champaign County financial policies? Moved by Ms. Michaels, seconded by Mr. Goss. Ms. Ogden, would you like to speak to this? And Mr. Weibel, does this require being sent to the full board, or is this a finance committee action?
My impression, this is procedural, so I don't think it really needs to. Just direction. We're directing the board, directing administrative staff, so I think it's just procedural.
Okay, so this is not.
But we can double check that.
Okay, yeah, determine whether this needs to go to the full board or not. I'll assume that the motion incorporates sending this to the full board if that's required. Ms. Ogden, would you like to speak to this?
I can start with this, and then I'll let Tammy chime in here. Each year, the county board reviews the financial policies of the county. We had Tammy's identified a couple of technical changes, but we do have a couple of substantive ones here. First one I want to speak to regards the general fund balance target. You know that we have a minimum set at 12.5% of expenditures. In looking at what the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, recommends, they actually recommend a 2 months of revenues, or expenditures, which translates to 16.7%. The original policy draft that we sent out had 16.5, but we corrected that based on doing the math. 2/12 is actually 16.666666, so 16.7%. We think that after reviewing that with the Treasurer's Office, that that level is more appropriate for us, particularly in view of what's going on with the state and payments and uncertainty in other revenue sources. So that's our recommendation, that we move the county to that to be our target, not necessarily our minimum, but our target should be that, and that would translate to be about $6 million based on our current expenditures. And then I'll let Tammy talk about the capital asset replacement fund.
The county has not been able to fully fund future reserves for capital asset replacement since 2008. We continue to calculate what that full reserve funding would look like. It's a very time-consuming process, and then we have to go back and recalculate based on current funding only. So one of the things that Rick and I feel is extremely important for the county to begin doing is to implement a long-term financial plan, and that would require us to have a better idea of what investment is necessary for capital asset replacement moving forward. So although in conversations with Mr. Alex, we feel that it's still necessary to identify that we're not fully funding future replacement, and we will continue to provide an estimate of what the lack of funding looks like. I think it's more important for us to spend time looking forward for the next 5 fiscal years to determine what kind of investment the county is going to need annually. One of the things that we're going to be having to fund in fiscal year 2018 is replacement of the sheriff's mobile radios. That is anticipated to be between $250,000 and $300,000, and really is something that we probably should have been looking at addressing 5 years ago. So the recommendation would be that we would move forward, we would estimate what full funding would look like, and we would actually work with departments to calculate what the needs are for the next 5 fiscal years for capital asset replacement purchases.
And for newer board members, we go through this dance every year, which is what she's referring to, where the county administration calculates what we should be putting into the capital asset replacement fund to make it whole, and then at the 9th or 10th hour, it goes by the wayside to balance the budget. We only spend what we absolutely need to spend through it, to pass through it that year. So that's what she's talking about. Ms. Petrie.
Well, what I would be interested in is when you get that calculation done, to add to it what our consultants projected that we needed for 10 years running of $4.5 million just for building maintenance, not building anything new. And then what is the additional amount to make it to the 16.7 from 12.5% increase into the reserves. So I think that's important information for all of us to have in our heads as we are wrestling with all the other numbers we've been given this evening in relationship to the nursing home.
I would caution, though, that part of the impetus behind this resolution is essentially trying to make sure that Ms. Ogden's time is better spent doing long-term planning for the future rather than detailed calculations of how much money we aren't spending, if that's acceptable. I mean, I think
Well,
estimates are sufficient.
it's not
I think
that-
estimates are sufficient as a matter of policy guidance.
Yeah, just the estimates, not down to the dime, but I think that's important because we just had 2 very long conversations with our treasurer and our auditor as to where the stresses and strains are in relationship to our general fund and when the bubble's going to burst. And so this is part of pushing that bubble until it's going to snap on us.
One of the, this is part of the whole overall plan. We're developing a real financial plan for the county. We made a really big step forward last year in developing a facilities plan overall. So I think we've got some fairly good numbers based on the fact we worked with our engineering consultants. So we have a plan now to do that. There's other parts of that capital asset replacement. Obviously, vehicles are another major asset and other key equipment that we're going to have to estimate. So that's why we need to do the same kinds of things, I think, with those assets that we have done with facilities. And the other part of that, too, is the strategic plan factors into that.
I would also note that this is one of the things that if we are ever able to replace our accounting system, a useful computer system will make this significantly easier to determine that number on an ongoing basis. Any other comments, questions, or discussion? Ms. Petrie.
I appreciate all the work on this, and have you dotted all the i's and t's and crossed the t's of what GAFO has suggested we be doing?
I think this will bring us into substantially greater compliance with what they recommend. Oh, it's interesting when you look at what GFOA puts out. I mean, there's always these little caveats and asterisks on their recommendations. You know, it's like, well, some entities may not need to do 2 months. I mean, it kind of depends on what they go back to. Basically, you need to look at what your patterns are, what your situation is, and then formulate something that's appropriate. But I think in this case, this is.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie.
It does the job.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. Any other comments, questions, or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. May I have a recommendation to send to the full board with, may I have a motion to send to the full board with a recommendation for approval? Item F3, the resolution authorizing the fiscal year 2018 budget process. Moved by Mr. Goss. May I have a second? Mr. Weibel. This information is provided in the packet. Mr. Snyder or Ms. Ogden, do you wish to speak to the changes or let your memo stand for itself?
I just want to say, I mean, the budget is the most important thing that the county board does the entire year and what the staff does the entire year. We've already begun the process in a sense in that last month we issued the 5-year financial forecast. We've given a framework to work within for now that we know what we think our revenues are going to be and what our expenditures may be. The resolution addresses how we go forward in preparing the budget. So what we're doing this year, we're proposing a couple of streamlining things, trying to reduce the number of meetings that we have. We're also looking at changing how we do the actual presentation of the budget. In the past, we've had department heads do the individual presentations. I think at one time the county administrator actually managed more of that process, so we'd like to return to that mode of presentation. I'd like to develop, with Tammy's help, a standard format for each department to use, the key parameters that you're going to be interested in seeing for the budget, and working from that, working together with the department heads to do the actual presentation. So we'll have maybe an overview, and then maybe have the department head to answer any questions that may have. And I think that'll move the process along a lot more quickly. Obviously, there's some differences in department sizes, so we can't spend the same amount of time on every department that, there's the treasurer's office has, maybe 5 employees. Sheriff's office has got a couple hundred people. So we want to put the time in where it's appropriate. Tammy, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on that.
I just wanted to mention that one of the things that we plan to do is to have a strategy session with general fund departments to try to get them together and provide ideas. Rick and I have already put together some ideas that we think might be good for implementing efficiencies, and we would like to review those with departments and ask for their input as well.
Some of these things are things that have already been discussed, such as taking a look at what's statutory responsibility versus non. Some of the things are maybe new ideas. We're thinking about whether it might be possible for some departments to go to a 4-day work week, for example. There might be certain economies we could achieve for the operations and also maybe change some of the work hours. We also have, we have a long list that we've reviewed with the Finance Committee. So that's what we're going to take and work in smaller groups with our department heads to see if we can come up with some better ideas than just simply making an across-the-board cut, which I think is probably the worst thing you can do for an organization, because there's no real thought that goes into priorities when you do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would ask that the members of this committee keep an open mind. Last year, it being, Mr. Snyder being new to the organization, what we saw was essentially a status quo budget, which is understandable. But now that he's had a year or two under his belt, and with Ms. Ogden getting more comfortable with her role, I think we're in a position where we can actually look at potential operational changes and look at what is our real, where are our real sensitivities. So I would ask people to keep an open mind. Clearly not everything that is going to get proposed is going to be a good idea, but don't assume that anything different than the status quo is a bad idea. So let's work together and see what we can do to try to manage this budget process. Any comments, questions, or suggestions? Mr. King.
Hi, I guess my two questions are about the hearing eliminations. I think looks like there was one for August 30th that was eliminated or suggested, and then there is the one for the public hearing on September 26th that's, I guess, suggested to be eliminated as well. Was there specific reasons for that?
I guess I can speak to that. The legislative budget hearings have generally been 3 nights, and the proposal here, that those are county board, is not public participation at those, if I remember correctly. That's an opportunity for the county board to hear from department heads about specifics of their budget. And I think we can probably get as much value out of 2 nights and increase the likelihood that individual board members can make both nights as opposed to having to be here for 3 nights. Because obviously, if you miss one, you're not, some of the departments are essentially not getting the benefit of your input. So if we can streamline that, get better attendance, and have more consistency in terms of who's there, I think that's probably a positive thing. The other public hearing was something that arose a couple of years ago, as Ms. Petrie's suggestion, to try to provide more opportunity for the public to have input into the budget process. Unfortunately, it was not well utilized. We did not essentially get any feedback, in my opinion, and Ms. Petrie may disagree, but I don't feel like we got any value out of that we didn't get from comments at the committee of the whole meetings and at the county board meetings where the budget was discussed. There are 6, is that right? 6 meetings where the budget is essentially open, and I feel like that's probably sufficient. The hope was that by having this extra public hearing focusing just on the budget, we could get more public engagement and more suggestions in terms of what direction to take the budget. But I don't feel like we got anything other than the comments that we got at the other opportunities. So that's not to say not to say I didn't. I mean, I was supportive of the idea when we did it, but I do have to question at this point whether it's worth the investment in staff time or board member time.
So it happened once?
It happened 3 times. You did it for 3 years. Ms. Petrie.
I concur. It is disappointing. It was captured from the budgeting principle of participatory budgeting, which is used a lot, very successfully. I appreciate the fact that there was a willingness to give it a go here. The first year, it was very well attended, actually, and it was held at the City Champaign Council Chambers. Year 2 and 3, not so, and it'd be nice to figure out why, because it's set for the public to come and talk to us totally, and the public has not taken the opportunity to do so, and it's really the prime time to do it because it's right at that part of the budgetary process where the public would have influence because there's room for adjustments and changes at that time. And so, and I do concur that since it's not successful, we should not continue it, and maybe there's some other things with brainstorming we can figure out how to engage the public better.
I guess I would add to that participatory budgeting works well in situations where there is, first of all, discretionary spending available, and second, where there are multiple comparably valued ways in which to spend that money. So, in a city, for example, a park district or something, where you're trying to decide on priorities for projects or deciding on priorities for what streets are going to get maintained or something like that, I think it can be very effective. One of the challenges that we have as a county, obviously, is we have virtually nothing that we do from a financial standpoint that isn't statutorily mandated, with a couple of exceptions. Yeah, exactly. I mean, our discretionary spending is about $250,000 out of a $37 million budget. So there's only so many discussions you can have about how to spend that. I've lost track of what we're doing. We're on the resolution of authorizing fiscal year 2018 budget process. Sorry, it's been a long night and it's about to get longer. Any other discussion, comments, or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. May I have a motion for item F4 to requesting approval of RFI 2017-4 for property brokerage and consulting services for the sale or transfer of the Champaign County Nursing Home. And that is included, a new version of that, I believe, is included in our yellow packet. Moved by Mr. Rector. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Anderson.
again, let Mr. Snyder go through this, especially the changes from the original.
Thank you, Mr. Alex.
I'm sorry, and if I can interrupt you, this, both of these requests for information, if approved tonight, we will basically be authorizing the county administrator to release these directly out of the finance committee. These don't come back to the full board.
Thank you for clarifying that. This first item here is the request for information. Basically, this is to follow up on what we saw as scenario 2 in our previous discussions. The county board authorized by voters to consider the sale or transfer or other disposition of the nursing home. So some of the things that I think are really important in this scenario, and what we have put into the RFI, is that we identified what the key board objectives are for disposition. What things do we want from a public policy standpoint do we want to achieve as we move forward on this program? We also need to make sure that the nursing home continues its operations. That means taking care of the financial issues and also management issues with this, specifically making sure that patient care is taken care of, and also making sure that we keep the county financially stable. So as part of this, we'll be seeking a consultant or a broker who has experience in dealing with long-term care facilities transactions, also having experience with public and not-for-profit entities, so that we capture the range of ideas that we've put forward. Not just a sale, but also looking at perhaps a community-based option for the nursing home. We are asking for fairly comprehensive services from beginning to the end of the process. That means that whoever is brought in will be working with the county board to develop those objectives that we talked about, to develop any kinds of marketing or other information that needs to be provided to prospective entities who might be interested in working with Champaign County, to handling the legalities of the transaction, working with our state's attorney's office. All of those things are listed in the scope of services in the RFI. Again, we want to make sure that they seek both traditional and non-traditional options, whether we're just talking about a private entity who might be interested in working on the home or maybe a consortium. We don't know yet, but we are working on those options. Also, we've asked that if they've had any experience with working with facilities that have had high Medicaid census, because that's a situation we find ourselves in. When I talked about scenario 2, I suggested that it may be about a 12-month timeline, so we're going to take a look at what that timeline might look like. So obviously, we had our vote in April. If the county board approves, we would release the RFI in May. We would continue to explore community-based options, as we also promised we would. I can tell you that we have been successful in getting together some key players that we feel are key players to agree to have a meeting to talk about this. Mr. Anderson and Ms. Emanuel from the nursing home board and I have met. Ms. Emanuel's drawn up some ideas for discussion. Those have been circulated to the entities, and we're planning to have a meeting within the next 2 weeks. So we are trying to move as expeditiously as we can on that. In June, we plan to have presentations to the Committee of the Whole from the top 3 brokers. We already have a list of 9 companies that might be interested in working with us. So we are asking for those submissions to be made by the end of May. We will have a small committee review those and make a recommendation of the top 3 to do a presentation before Committee of the Whole on June 8th. I'm not sure what the date is, but at CAL. And then we would have the service provider selected but before the end of June. In July, as you know, MPA's contract ends, so we need to prepare for that. The next item we'll be talking about is the RFP for management services, but we know that we'll have somebody else in place at that point. I would hope that we would also be able to begin solicitation of proposals, that we would have developed our list of objectives and some marketing information and be able to start talking with other entities about possibilities. August, I think that will bring us to a 90-day review point. We'll have had 90 days to talk about alternatives for management of the home, starting here in May, June, July. By August, I think that if we've identified anyone who might be a serious or prospective operator for the home, that's not just a private entity, I think we'll have identified it by then. If we haven't, I think that we're going to have to make a decision one way or the other how we want to proceed. As we pointed out earlier, or what the treasurer has pointed out with our cash flow situation, I think it's likely that we would need to authorize at least an additional $250,000 loan for the nursing home to continue operations into September. I don't see any way getting around that. It could possibly be additional amount to that, depending on other changes that could happen with Medicaid or any unexpected demands from vendors. September, I think that we would close our solicitation and start reviewing the options that we do have. I think at that point we would also entertain a discussion about debt issuance. As you may recall, it talked about utilizing the levy as a source of monies to reimburse the county, reimburse vendors, and prepare the home for any kind of transition. We could do that, I think, in good faith if we have a decision made as to the direction we're going to go with the disposition of the home. That would obviously alleviate some of the other financial problems we're seeing both at the home and at the county in general. In October, we would, that's normally when we would be filing or placing on file the FY 2018 budget. I think at that point, that would be when we ought to have some initial recommendation of a finalist as far as perhaps doing our due diligence work, which would continue into November and December. You see, we also in November would pass our final budget and levy ordinance. I think we're going to, as much as possible, we want to know where we're going so we can have structured our budget appropriately, made accommodations for anything, any expenses that we anticipate as we go forward in the process. I think that we're also probably going to have to issue a tax anticipation warrant once again to cover IMRF and FICA. I don't see any other way for the county to cover those expenses unless we do it maybe out of the debt service, but I'm not sure. We'll have to take a look at which makes the most sense from an economic standpoint. Moving into 2018, I think we would finalize our negotiations and aim for contract approval by February and then close the transaction in March. So that gives you basically a rough estimate of when I think those items could happen. There may be some activities that could take longer or maybe less time, I don't know. But I think 12 months is probably a pretty reasonable estimate based on what I've heard from other counties that have gone through this process. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions on the request for information? Ms. Petrie, I assume it's your hand? Yep.
Okay, I'm going to make two conflicting statements. I understand your timeline, but I have a terrific concern about the timeline in relationship to what we just heard from the auditor and the treasurer. That's 12 months down the line, and I'm not certain, based on that information, if the county can take that kind of financial stress and strain. And then...
Do you want me to respond to that, or you want to do your next question first?
No, go ahead. I can remember the second one.
Okay, so going back in the timeline, that's why I'm thinking August, September, we're going to have to think about issuing debt of some kind to provide some support. If we're looking at the costs going through the rest of the year, we talked about 1.3 million, or being at about 1.3 million. We know we have $282,000 and another debt service payment that is not likely to be paid by the nursing home. We'll have $250,000 additional. It could be larger than that. So we're talking actually being about $2 million in the hole by the end of this year. So the only way I see us being able to do anything is to look at issuing debt to cover that, with the plan that we are going to make some kind of transition with the property.
I do understand that, but I wanted to make certain that was on the record about my concerns, not questioning your timeline
No, I'm just
per se, but.
just explaining my
Yeah,
thought process
right.
on it. So.
I understand. Then on the other hand, and all of this has to happen at the same time, unfortunately, from the perspective that I look at these months and I know what these months are going to be like because we're deep in budget. And budget is the key policy document. And it takes a lot of time and effort and study. And we are going to have an RFP and two staff decisions to be making all along this timeline. And so my one cautionary note is that I have seen historically past county boards be under the pressure of making a lot of decisions on building decisions, and they've been fraught with errors. So I hope somewhere along the line there that we can build in some caution in our decision-making process.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Snyder, as I hear these numbers and Patsy's comments and your reference to the $2 million in debt, I also realize that we still owe the vendors $3 million. And we're talking stringing that out, if you will, from lack of a better term, for another year, potentially. Because we won't. So we've got to come up with money. First off, somebody has to deal with these vendors, and then it's getting to the point where we've held them off so long that they may take legal action. And I suspect there's potential of that debt even becoming greater. And my concern has always been, I've freely voiced it here in this board, with this board and with the advisory board over at the nursing home, that our greatest charge is to ensure the safety and care of those residents. And I'm concerned that with these financial pressures, and what we're already starting to see happening over there, that it's going to continue to put at risk, if you will, our ability to provide the best care that we want to for those residents until this transition period's it has gone through. So it's not as if, I look at this debt and I think, well, maybe we could put some things off. You really can't. There's not much to put off over there when it comes to caring for these people and making sure they have the medical care that they need, the food, and some of the basic services they're needing to be comfortable. I just wanted to voice that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Any other comments or questions related to the RFI for brokerage consulting services?
And I would ask for a roll call on this, please.
I will join you on that. So will Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I think for both of these, would like to have an amendment that we could do. I think we owe a fiduciary responsibility to the county in what the value is. I don't know what the value is. I don't think anybody sitting here at the table knows what the value is. But in the amendment would be that we would hire an independent fee appraiser to appraise what we have, which allows us to then make decisions based upon an independent examination of the books, examination of the physical structure, and so what is there today, as it is. I'd like to make that as an amendment to both.
Yeah, I'm having trouble figuring out exactly how we would work that into a RFI for brokerage services. I mean, I certainly agree that we need to understand the value of the facility.
If we don't have a vehicle to do that, I mean, I think both of those.
I mean, I would sort of assume that would go without saying as part of any.
No, we have to. We actually have to pursue that.
I guess I would suggest that be something something we'd have to do as a separate proposal or a separate action item. And you could certainly ask the county administrator to bring a resolution to that effect to the county board. Okay. I'm not sure, it's not something that I think is directly, it's not something I would think you would write into an
Doesn't
RFI
fit.
for either brokerage services or for management services.
It doesn't fit here, but I think we just need to add that to to our work.
I concur with Mr. Mitchell. I think that I think our statutory obligations would include identifying what exactly is the fair market value.
Yeah, I would
of the
assume that would be
business.
part of any due diligence that would be required, I mean, when you're dealing with a publicly funded asset.
If we can do that on the front side, that way, when we start marketing it, we know what we have, because at this point, we're just talking about subjective things that we can't put our finger on. So I think once we establish that, good or bad, you might like the number, you might not, but at the end of the day, you have hired somebody that's going to tell you the value, and also that allows you then to negotiate with anyone, and knowing exactly what, you may sell it above the appraised value, you may sell it below the appraised value, but we have to have a benchmark.
I think I saw Mr. Hartke first. Okay. Then Mr. Marsh, and then Ms. Petrie.
Just a question, would that have to be a public number if we did appraise it? Because we certainly wouldn't want to hand an appraisal out to bidders.
I'll have to think about that one. Let me talk to the state's attorney's office about that, if that's something that could be shielded.
There are some FOIA exceptions related to negotiation and property, but I'm not sure exactly whether that would fall into one of the exemptions or not. Ms. Petrie.
I understand Mr. Marsh's concern, but I also concur with Mr. Mitchell, and I concur especially from the perspective that we've talked about this, and we've talked about how this might help us with all of our budgetary obligations, but we have no idea what we're talking about. And so even though it may not be a dead-on number, which I can accept that, but it would be good to have a ballpark number plus or minus X amount.
And I would argue that it's relevant pretty much regardless of what direction things go over there. If the decision is made to work with a local provider, or if some community group feels inclined to take it on, they need to know what they're getting into too. So I certainly think putting numbers around is a good idea. I again would ask that you withdraw that as an amendment to these RFIs, but that we direct the county administrator to bring us something along those lines.
I didn't know how to put it on the table, but that sounds great.
Okay,
Thank you.
no, I appreciate that. Any other comments or questions specific to the RFI for brokerage consulting services? Mr. Goss.
Yeah, this might be just down in terms and conditions in number 4. We're talking about preparing contracts, and I'm not sure exactly whether that's a contract with the actual brokerage company, as you describe it there, but, we're going to need some beefed up real estate language, and we're going to need, I don't know whether we've got a state's attorney person that does that, or we're going to have independent counsel that's used to doing real estate transactions, because they're not going to just sign a standard agreement that we draw up that doesn't have the appropriate real estate language. So I think we're going to have to also have some sort of an attorney involved. I don't think we've got the expertise, I guess.
Yeah, that would generally be done through the state's attorney's office, but my guess is the state's attorney would bring in outside counsel. They do that frequently for things like labor negotiations and other areas where they may not have specific expertise in-house. But the state's attorney is the county's attorney essentially. So I think that process would have to originate with the state's attorney's office.
In any institutional property advisor, and we talked to other counties that have gone through this process, and the recommendation was that you want to get someone who, as you pointed out, is skilled in this area of practice. And I don't think, although we have some great attorneys at the state's attorney's office, I don't think that anyone there would have that expertise. So the recommendation is to work through the broker to obtain that expertise.
Yeah, I mean, we could be penny wise and pound foolish here in a blink of an eye if we don't have the right legal representation for a real estate deal.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess as I read the language, it says communication and coordination with the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office. Was there other language that you were
No, it was down on number 4. The terms and conditions, number 4, and I'm looking at 2 different ones because I made my notes on the original. So any agreement or contract resulting from the acceptance of a proposal shall be in forms either supplied or approved by the county and shall contain at a minimum all applications of the RFI.
Oh, okay, this is for responses to the RFI itself.
Okay.
So this would be negotiating, this would be
Negotiating terms of the
agreements with
RFI.
the broker or with the consultant,
Okay.
not with a buyer or
No, no, and
transferee.
what I'm saying is, I think we want to be represented from the get-go with a broker, just because they're not going to sign a piece of paper that doesn't have the appropriate real estate language. I mean, so we're going to need I think we're going to need an attorney early on, and then, of course, when we get down to contracts and that kind of stuff, obviously, we need to be represented, but I don't think it's a bad thing to start. We start working with brokers, you know, they're used to standard language, a lot of real estate terms that are in there, and we need to make sure that we've got those, because they're going to want to throw something in front of us and we're going to tear it apart.
I understand, yeah, and that I think would have to start with the state's attorney's office, but I would certainly encourage the state's attorney to bring in.
Farm out.
To bring in
Expertise.
outside counsel, which they, again, do on a regular basis in other areas, so I'm sure they'd be amenable to that.
That was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goss. Any other comments or questions on this RFI?
Just want to reiterate again that this has been structured as best we can to maintain as many options at this point, so we're not locked into any particular path, so we can explore all the ideas that we've talked about.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other comments, questions, or discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll? And this is for release of the RFI number 2017-004.
Cowart? Esri?
Yes.
Goss?
Yes.
Harper? Hartke?
No.
Heiser?
No.
King? Marsh?
Yes.
McGuire? Michaels?
Yes.
Mitchell? Patterson?
No.
Petrie?
Yes.
Rector? Rosales?
No.
Summers? Weibel? Anderson? Clemens? And Alex?
Yes. Make that 14-5. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a recommendation? Did that count? Sorry, 15-5. Okay. Moving on to item F5, may I have a motion to approve the release of RFP 2017-5 for management and consulting services for the Champaign County Nursing Home. And a copy of this was distributed in the yellow, actually as a separate, not in the yellow packet, right? It's a separate, it's this one. Oh, it is the yellow packet. Okay, moved by Mr. Esri. May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Michaels. And yeah, my apologies, it is the last item in the yellow packet. Mr. Snyder, do you want to speak to this, or?
I'll be happy to,
Okay,
Mr.
go
Alex. And my apologies for multiple versions here. We reviewed this with the Nursing Home Advisory Board last night, and we received some input, and I've made some adjustments to the RFP based on that to try to make it more reflect the options or the idea that we don't want to lock ourselves into any particular path. I've had some discussions with staff at the nursing home, and you know, originally I thought maybe we might be able to satisfy some of the needs we have for the home based on temporary employee arrangements. But I think that given some of the departures that we're anticipating, we may need a higher level of services, and I think it may be appropriate this time to do an expedited RFP. This RFP is going to have an advertising period shorter than what we normally would under county policy, but it does adhere to Illinois statutes, so we are in compliance with the law. And what we're seeking here primarily is to focus on services that are currently provided through MPA. We want to make sure that we take care of our compliance, our business office and billing in particular, which is a very critical issue for the home, making sure that we get every bit of revenue in that we can, and having people that understand how that occurs. The requirements in Medicaid and Medicare billing are onerous, and you can get into a lot of trouble and create a lot of potential for fines if you don't do things exactly right. So we need someone who's skilled in that area. We can't just have anybody, any financial advisor necessarily do that. Let me take a look here if there's anything else I wanted to point out on the scope of services. So there are some issues under minimum qualifications. I've also included, there are some items under the Illinois Counties Code that require certain elements to be in the contract, so those are listed here. We've also given notice about any proprietary information. Did I look at the right one here? Yes. Unfortunately, we've also been informed after talking with our current administrator that she does not intend to continue with the home. I know that there's been discussions about that. I think that from a continuity standpoint, that's very unfortunate for us. So we are going to need to bring someone who has a licensed or is an Illinois licensed nursing home administrator very quickly. One of the other things that statute requires is regular reports to the county board. So that's included also in the scope of services. And they'll also be working with our existing staff, our HR director and other folks there, our admissions director, to go on an ongoing basis. So, and this will be a short-term contract. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
If no one else has any, I have one. You had mentioned discussions with an individual who would potentially be interested in this position. Is it your understanding that we could expect them to respond to the RFI?
I expect at least 2 entities to respond to this. I'd spent some time doing some research and finding out, because I was concerned about whether we'd get any responses at all to this on such a short basis, but I believe it will have at least 2 and hopefully more.
Thank you. And this is, just to clarify, this is open to individuals as well as to management companies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any comments or questions with regard to this RFP? Excuse me, I misspoke earlier. It's a request for proposals, not a request for information. Mr. Goss.
One quick one. So am I understanding that the 2 job descriptions that you put out would be totally separate from this? There wouldn't be any overlap? Or would there be overlap?
Well, I want to give us the most flexibility at this point, because I'm not sure what kind of proposals we're going to get back. I know that we'll have some response to it, but for instance, suppose that an offer might be able to do the business services, but maybe they wouldn't have the nursing home administrator, we might still want to bring in a separate administrator to fulfill that position, or they might hire somebody. I don't know, but I'd just like to have that kind of out there as how we would structure that. And I think it also provides a guideline for any offers who come in, that that's kind of how we would expect the division of duties would be made.
But I think going directly to Mr. Goss's question, if we received a response, if the successful respondent were someone like MPA, for example, who was a more of a unified management company, presumably they would provide staff to take the place of these positions, right? We wouldn't have both a management company and these 2 employee positions.
Ideally not, no. We wouldn't. It's only in certain circumstances if we find ourselves where we don't have a company. I mean, that's also a possibility that we could get responses and maybe we decide we don't want to go with that direction. We may still want to bring in temporary employees, so.
Well, exactly. We've got to have a registered or certified nursing home administrator, so under no uncertain circumstances can we avoid that. I was just kind of confused to where this all fits, so. I
Yeah.
appreciate your clarification. Thank you.
Did that answer the question? I mean, my understanding is that the positions may or may not be filled as county employees, depending on who responds, whether we could conceivably get a management company, we could conceivably get a consultant, essentially an individual consultant, 1099 type employee, or it could be a county employee. So all doors are open.
Okay. Any other questions, I guess?
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Snyder? Okay, seeing none. Anybody want a roll call on this one, Mr. Rector? Okay, I'll join you. Would the clerk please call the roll? And again, we were voting on releasing request for proposal for management and consulting services for the Champaign County Nursing Home, RFP 2017-5.
Cowart. Esri.
Yes.
Goss.
Yes.
Harper. Yes. Hartke. Yes. Heiser. Yes. King.
Yes.
Marsh.
Yes.
McGuire. Michaels.
Yes.
Mitchell. Patterson.
Yes.
Petrie.
Yes.
Rector. Rosales.
Yes.
Summers.
Yes.
Weibel. Anderson. Clemens. And Alex.
Yes, that was a close one. Motion carries. Find my agenda again. We have no other business. We have no chair's report. Items for consent are D1, 2, 3, and 4, E1, F, maybe 2, F3, and that's it. The RFI and RFP will be released immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Is there any other business? Seeing none, we're adjourned.